maybe not everybody was there. Fly in the desert. Anyway, thank you very much, so many of you for being here. It's actually a little more challenging sometimes when you have meetings in person to get both the screen and the people in person. So especially those of you on the screen, when you want to speak, if you are remote, please don't hesitate to speak up because I might not see you unless somebody nudges me or you yell. But anyway, it's really good to see everyone in person and I do appreciate it. Gabby, why don't you go ahead and call roll first and then I'll do a few things.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will now call roll. Sandy Rowe,
Present.
Greg Heyman, Rukiah Adams, Natalie Arnott, Rachel Bisco, Richard Devlin, Arnell Fajardo, present. Evelyn Coker,
Present.
Teresa Martinez,
Present.
Mary Middleton,
Present.
Jen Proctor Andrews, Emily Simnett,
Present.
Mochi Thomas Apelli, Jennifer Smith,
Here.
Gail Yamasaki. That is a roll. We have a quorum, Madam Chair, and I expect some more folks to be joining.
Wonderful. Well, as you know from Ben's note and from looking at the agenda, those of you who are new and who haven't been through this cycle, December ends up being a lot of reports. I remember back to my first years there, they really are very helpful if you're new in getting to know both the rhythm and the business of the HECC and to see all the work that goes on all year long. These, of course, are required by the legislature, and they're also very informative to us and our decision making. So that is most of the meeting. And as we go through those, don't hesitate to ask questions if there's more about the work that you need to know. We also have after lunch a presentation on, is that retention? No, that's enrollment. Yes, enrollment management, which I'm looking forward to. That'll be very informative and helpful to us. So, also to begin this meeting, I feel like I need to say a couple of things about the governor's proposed budget, that, as you know, that has been sent us this summer, was released last week. We have experts on the agenda with Ben and Sarah Foster from the governor's office, and of course Kyle. So I'm the one who knows the least. But since I did on your behalf submit a letter to the governor ringing the alarm bells if we were kept to the 1% that she was asking from agencies, I feel like I can say a few things, and then if I get anything wrong or they disagree, the experts can correct me since I'm going before they are. In the letter, we stated, as you know, that the budget did not protect all the existing programs, including programs that have been stood up to help students who were most needy and most in need for additional services. And then in addition to that, and difficulty or inability to start new programs, in addition to not providing for growth, that the formula set up or the formula used for the continuing budget for CSL really doesn't account for some of the contractual salary increases. So the schools or the universities and colleges are going to have to make those up where they did not meet their contractual terms. Now, we believe, and this is very good news, that we will be able to re-examine that with DAS for the next biennium, for the next budget cycle, but of course that doesn't help us this time. So while we are disappointed with this budget, I guess I would say it is inadequate, as we signaled in the letter. I would also say, as Ben told me separately in a phone call, that there were some weeks recently where they thought that all the agencies were going to have to undergo a pretty serious cut. So in fact, the last budget estimate came in higher has helped us. And you see that there are some good things in it. in terms of the 25 million for Oregon Opportunity Grant, the additional money, about 20, in excess of 25 million, for training mental health professional and some other things. So there was some good things in it. I just want to, though, emphasize that we still do not believe that this is adequate funding for what we need to do for the state of Oregon and through higher education and training. And we understand that this puts the colleges and universities in a very tough position. Because as you know, we have as one of our very highest priorities, making secondary, post-secondary education and training affordable for Oregonians, for students. And we will continue to have that as a North Star for us. And so the colleges and universities, if this budget proposal holds, there's more budget estimates coming in, revenue estimates, excuse me, coming in. And of course, the legislature has not met yet. And it's up to them. But at any rate, this is a better position than it could have been. It's certainly a better position than years when we've had to cut. But it is not the position we think we should be in and need to be in. So that is all I will say about that. And now Ben can correct me.
Nothing to correct there. I think you can move into your opening comments if you have any additional, or move into the approval.
That's okay. Thank you. Okay, we will move into approval of the minutes. Thank you. Second? Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. Minutes passed. Okay, and now we will go to the executive break.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the that opening summary. I actually won't say really anything in addition about the governor's recommended budget. We'll hear from the governor's policy advisor following my report, and Sarah Foster, who's here. So that's terrific. And then Kyle Thomas during the legislative report will give a more in-depth summary of the governor's budget for HECC. You should also receive by email between now and Kyle's report a fact sheet on the governor's budget we just finalized yesterday that will get added to today's materials that sort of goes in almost at a technical level through the governor's budget, comparing it to current service level and the current legislatively approved budget for this biennium. So more to come on that, but I'll touch on some other items of note. Let me start just this acknowledging that I missed the last meeting. I was here. It was the first, I think, over 100 HECC meetings since 2013. The first that I have not been present for. It felt very, very strange. I was
Barely got.
I was in my conference and I was just so conscious of the fact that you were meeting. I had my phone out and I was tempted to like log in. And I was like, no, then they'll see I'm logging in. It's going to be strange. But they didn't really participate, right? I was in another meeting. So I didn't. But I was very conscious and I was very not to get any texts. It must have known
You prepare us well.
I was very grateful.
You prepare us very well.
That it went well. So thank you. Okay, it is fall or nearly winter, and for higher ed and for students and prospective students, it means it is the actually beginning of the cycle for considering next fall's enrollment and financial aid for our agency. That means we've opened the applications to state financial aid and our various scholarships and grant programs like HECC. So this year, the FAFSA has opened on more or less, at least closer to a normal schedule. So as of December 1st, folks throughout the US can access the FAFSA for the 25-26 award year. But again, that means we're busy. We're now processing state grant and scholarship applications, trying to get the word out to high school students and to continuing college students and to adults who may be looking to return to higher education and training. That whole world is open and available to them. And one piece of the HECC's work on affordability that we talk relatively little about because it is primarily privately funded, but that we administer, 600 separate scholarships available to Oregon students that, again, are accessed and available through the state portal at OSAC through the HECC, privately funded, but in a unique arrangement that it may be unique. I don't know this for 100% certainty, but we may be the only state in the country that has this type of arrangement with private donors or community foundations that aggregate private donors and then allow the state or support the state in administering. And it creates this single portal for students to access various types of financial aid, both public and private. So just wanted to note that it's exciting, and we certainly hope that you will help us get the word out about the opportunities that students have to access aid through the state of Oregon and the HECC. You hopefully saw news over the last few weeks. We not only sent out a press release, but then there was subsequent press coverage on a variety of outlets about the latest workforce readiness grant decisions that we released in late November. This is one of the major programs under the Future Ready Oregon umbrella. And this was our largest grant making round of $40 million out to community organizations and education and training providers with a focus on career pathways for manufacturing, healthcare, and technology. Our 3 industry consortia in those 3 fields helped really derive the direction that we took with those awards. It means we've now awarded grants under that workforce readiness grant making portfolio to over 120 different organizations. Multi-million-dollar awards and are really, you'll see the report. You have seen the report in your packet that covers our progress in that Future Ready Oregon through mid-2024. And there's more to come. This is the largest grant making and impact has yet to be felt. But that was exciting. Back in November, you had received an invitation to, so you're likely aware of our adult basic education summit that we held in Salem. This brings practitioners from around the state who work in GED or in adult basic skills settings, supporting adult Oregonians in becoming college ready and sort of completing high school or high school equivalency and in English language acquisition. And it's a really terrific event for practitioners that we put on annually. And we had some outline guests and great speakers, and it was well attended and participants were very enthusiastic. So I like to note these various events that we do throughout the year. We try to invite you to them, recognize that it's unlikely that you can attend many of those, but nevertheless, they're big undertakings for our staff, and they are ways that we're helping community and Oregonians around some big issues that we've seen on Oregon. Just back to Future Ready for a moment. The Oregon Business Council held its annual leadership summit this Monday in Portland, and again, some of the work, the Future Ready Oregon work to help build an equitable workforce was featured at the summit. Jennifer Purcell, who is the HECC lead for Future Ready Oregon, was part of a panel that described the work of the industry consortia and big audience there that was engaged in helping understand and share reflections on and build support for the work of the industry consortia and workforce readiness grants in particular. Jennifer is also featured on our podcast that one of the keynote speakers at the summit, Tom Vander Ark, from an organization called Getting Smart, produced, and we'll share that out in our next newsletter as we get the opportunity to hear more from Jennifer and follow about the work that we're doing and build those equitable workforce pathways. Final thing I'll note, because again, it's while you have a report in your packets from the Transfer Council, just some recent or related to our transfer work, just some recent update that the council just approved 19 new additional common course numbering courses. So that you talk more about this later in the day, the progress that that group and the HECC are making to help align the community college and public university pathways for those transfer students. But that was a big chunk of effort by that group and its various subcommittees, and excited to keep noting the progress that we're making on those common course numberings and the major transfer maps. So I think with that, Manager, those are a few of the recent highlights. I'll turn it back to you and head next into a report from the governor's office. So I'm sorry, the agenda's 2 notes. I like to make sure to mention this out loud, that within your packet are the 2 most recent budget updates from the HECC operations team. They describe as usual, they describe our spending within this biennium against our current budget. So if there are questions about how we're spending or how we're staying within budget for the current biennium.
Any questions for Ben? Yes.
Oh, Ben, I just wanted to say one comment about the Future Ready for this last go round. I noticed that some high schools got funded and some community-based organizations, which was really exciting to me, knowing that we're having a decline in traditional high school enrollments, but that we're putting some money in Future Ready to have them think about beyond high school and into post-secondary. So that was kind of exciting for me to see.
Yeah, if I could, I guess, paradigm for Future Ready that's different is, most, as you well know, most of the HECC's funding and support is for institutions, right? We fund public universities, do what public universities do, we fund community colleges, do what community colleges do. Then, of course, we have our grant making. That represents 90% or so of the HECC's funding. What Future Ready Oregon has done is say, instead, we will fund innovative models of service delivery that focus on partnership between typically a community-based organization and some education and training provider to build career pathways or pathways to career, especially focused on healthcare, technology, and manufacturing. And it's pretty institutionally agnostic, right? We have that, it's focused on priority population, so there's a very much an equity focus, but it does not say this is necessarily public university's job or community college's job. It says, it asks the state, it asks community, how do you want to get the work done? Right? How are you prepared to organize yourselves to bring Oregonians into these career training pathways, and then we'll support it. It has been, we've learned a lot, and Jennifer Purcell actually presented to the Senate committee earlier this week on some of those lessons. She's presenting this morning to the House committee on some of the lessons that we've learned from Future Ready. You see that in the report that you'll review later today. But it's been a real sort of sea change in how we think about funding education and training in Oregon. It does open the door to some of those different types of organizations we can support.
Anything else for Ben right now? Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Okay, now we move to is Sarah Foster here. See the top of it headed back. Yeah. Yes, I could see the top of your head and I wasn't sure.
I'll just sit here.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem. We're in Salem quite a bit these days. It was nice to just hop off the highway, like I used to when I came to the HECC, rather than bite into downtown Salem. Well, thank you for having me back. I just appreciate the ability to kind of share the governor's. I think the intent of just the few minutes I have is just to give you a little more insight into the governor's budget and process. I know that you shared some things at the beginning, so some of it might be duplicative, and I'll probably steal Kyle's thunder, who will go into more detail, but just wanted to say at a high level, when we began this process with the ARB and the capping at 1%, that really was the governor's intent of being pretty pragmatic. And she's been very clear that prior processes have had a lot of wish lists that are well intended, but aren't based in the reality of our budget process. So wanted to take just a different approach to budgeting, and the revenue forecast that was coming out in particular in September was looking like we might have to make some pretty deep cuts across state agencies. And luckily, thankfully, our November forecast was promising and helped us both avoid cuts across agencies and of course, the HECC avoid as many potential impacts to students. We were able to both fund current service level and make some strategic investments to deepen the governor's commitment and progress, in particular around housing and homelessness, behavioral health, and K-12 education and training and our youth. So that is the kind of foundation for when we were putting the budget together. And I'll just highlight that above CSL, and you mentioned this, the governor made some specific investments in the Oregon Opportunity Grant, so $25 million, some increases in the Tribal Student Success Grant. I think I have the number here, should be drilled in my head, $2.5 million above CSL, and then the Oregon National Guard tuition assistance. So really wanting to honor and deepen commitment to student assistance for access and affordability to post-secondary education. For the Community College Support Fund, while I understand that we're in conversations around how CSL is calculated, it was a 6.9% increase above the 23-25 LAB. That's will probably be in your 2-pager, but that is reflected in the governor's budget. And then the Public University Support Fund is a 7.3% increase from 23-25 LAB, not CSL, LAB, and those are two different things, but wanted to clarify that. And then again, the reauthorization of the ARPA funding so that the Future Ready Oregon work can continue. I know that those contracts and that work will be obligated at the end of the year, but we did need to reauthorize, I think it's $62 million of that resource. So that shows up in the governor's recommended budget. And then some additional investments in behavioral health workforce, education and training. So I think the final number is like $25.7 million in behavioral health education and training, and public universities, community. The intent behind that is public universities, community colleges, and I think that was it. Gail, you were talking about Future Ready Oregon and the K-12 and community-based organizations. The intent is that the ecosystem of workforce and talent development organizations would be able to access that resource. In addition to some investments in scholarships through OSAC, that's part of that behavioral health workforce investment. So just wanted, and then I'll say the capital improvements. There was a $422.5 million in capital improvement across public universities and community colleges. And that includes the PSU Performing Arts Center and some specific recommendations around community college projects, and then the $200 million across the public universities. So that is, I think, a summary. Just wanted to thank, this is the governor has shared, this was an iterative process, and the agencies were more engaged, I think, because we were going through a potential cuts situation and putting together our best thinking around that. And that took a lot of time, a lot of thought. And so just want to thank Ben and his team for just the availability and I had a lot of meetings with our CFO office, the governor's office, as we were making these final decisions, and just really grateful that we didn't have to get to that point, but just appreciative of the team. And then as we move into the legislative session, our focus is going to be ensuring that the governor budget is successful and in particular that we are leading on the behavioral health investment package for the workforce. So questions?
Yes, questions, Sarah Paulson? Thank you so much for that context and for all the work you have done to get the governor's proposed budget in this shape. And we really do appreciate it and understand that the revenue was limited, and we appreciate your efforts on everything you've done to try to maximize the impact we can make. So thank you. Thank you for being here again.
Yeah, thank you.
If I can make this, she mentioned collaborative work with
Yes.
the governor's office, and it is, I want to validate that statement. This process has been one where our staff has been consulted every step of the way, has been aware of the governor's been very clear about her priorities and about her expectations for agencies and where the opportunities were, and where the potential challenges were. We have not been surprised at any point in this process, other than perhaps by that great revenue for in November. And so, yes, I just wanted to sit, in large part because of Sarah in particular, over the last several months, it has felt like a very constructive and engaged and close open working relationship with our office. So
Thank you. That does make a difference.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're on to public testimony now. Is that correct, Guthrie?
Yes. First up will be Christopher Zimmerly Beck with the Oregon Education Association. Christopher, are you able to turn on your camera and microphone?
Yes, hello, everybody.
We're not hearing you.
Oh, hang on.
And we will remind our guest, as always, that there is a 3-minute limit. And welcome, Christopher,
Hello, can you hear me now?
if you're connected. See connect.
Are you able to hear me now? What's going on?
Christopher?
Yes, can you hear me now?
I wonder if it's volume in the room.
It's not.
We can hear you online.
What's that?
The volume
We can
is
all
max.
hear him on Teams.
Okay, so I think it's just the
Veronica, will
room.
you try taking yourself off mute if you're listening and see if we can hear you at all?
I can
No.
hear like
No,
I
So
can hear
it
him.
Sounds like it's an issue with our settings for the room.
Okay.
I wonder if
I'm a patient man. Just tell me when.
We have 2 folks signed up, both remote.
okay. We could also come back to this while we're waiting, so they can hear us, which is good. And we could come back to this once we are able to hear that.
We will do that, and be aware, those of you who are listening in or who might want to make a comment, that sometime remotely, we've had connectivity issues from before we call the meeting to order. So we've had them here also. So these glitches may persist, but Guthrie is working on it and our tech people, and we'll get back to you and put you on the agenda as soon as we are sure we can hear you.
And there are I don't think we have any commissioners online currently, so all the commissioners who are attending the meeting are here in the room.
Commissioner Bisco has.
Commissioner Bisco.
Let's go stay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, while the Guthrie and tech people try to straighten that out, we're gonna go to community college program notification. You see in your packet 5.1, the notification from Lane Community College. This is at the second stage. It does not require any action from us. It's just the notification that it's been approved by staff to move on to the third phase. Is there,
No, just looking at the next item. You're ready for.
yes, for Kyle? You
Yeah,
can come in, or is Kyle?
I think he is remote.
Well, let's try it just for fun.
Yeah. Kyle, are you on the line? I think he's in the Capitol this morning, so maybe join in.
Yeah, that's scheduled to end.
Yeah, he may have been expecting. We can take their items, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move into the strategic plan implementation. I am.
I think so. Good idea.
All right, so we are,
7-0 now, but
we're cruising, guys. We're on 7.0 already.
we'll let you know when you put it in the works.
We make sure meeting. Seriously. Well, we do this. We're flexible and creative. Let me check here. Yeah, Kyle's in the legislative committee for a while, so we'll get him back later on, and hopefully by that point, volume will be fixed. Great. Okay, so item 7.0 in your packets relates to your strategic plan and next steps with the agency's implementation of your plan. We at the staff level have been really excited about the fact that this commission in October, following a year-long process, adopted a new strategic plan. And have spent considerable time trying to understand how we're going to put this into action for you and support you in making the kinds of decisions that it may suggest you or require you to make over the coming years. The plan, as you know, is while it fits barely on a page, I guess. There's a lot on that page. It's 18 discrete strategies organized under 5 goals, alongside, of course, the values, vision, and mission. And I recognize that at the agency level, we have work underway that is related to many of those strategies. And we have strategies on that page that imply a whole lot of different or new work. So part of what we need at the staff level to do at the outset is assess sort of where are we with this particular strategy, with those 18 strategies, and what do we need to be doing differently in order to realize those goals through that strategic work? What do we need to add or request that we add to the agency or take away from the agency in order to meet those goals through that strategic work? So with continued support from Coraggio Group, who was our contractor for the development of the strategic plan, we've retained them for another few months to kick off the implementation effort. And as the materials in your packet describe, that involves the following. We've identified Ramona Rodemaker, my deputy, and I have identified 5 executive team leads for the 5 goals. So those are noted in your packet. We've assigned those folks the responsibility for being the executive sponsor for those 5 goal areas, which has been assigned one of them. If you look closely, I don't expect the commission to necessarily do so. We didn't choose those particular individuals for their expertise or their office's work in that area. We actually are looking to them to be coaches of the teams that I'll get to in a moment, to help draw to the executive team's attention barriers or changes that we may need to make as an agency, to be holding the teams and our executive team accountable for moving the work forward, but not necessarily to be subject matter experts in those strategic areas. So you see the 5 folks in the material, the 5 staff members who we've identified as those executive sponsors. They'll also be responsible for preparing quarterly reports to this commission that you will receive about our progress in those goal areas. They'll be working on further identifying the measures, the outcomes associated with those goals. You may recall that in the strategic plan, we've begun to identify those specific measures of progress for each of the 5 goal areas, but we didn't really land them in every case with concrete, specific measures or outcomes. So we'll be leaning on those executive team sponsors to work with our research and data team and others to determine what those exact measurements should be. So you'll get to know them, those 5 HECC staff leads, in connection with those 5 goals, because they will be reporting on that progress, or at least helping prepare a written report, likely from time to time presenting orally to the commission on our progress against the 5 goal areas quarterly. Moving to the strategies, so each of the 5 goal areas has 3 or 4 strategies associated with it, and we have out of the 18, we've identified 9 strategies that we have chosen to prioritize to begin implementation soon, meaning begin the process of assessing where we are currently, what we're doing currently, what we should do differently, and putting into place new plans. We will assemble teams, so staff teams, inter-office staff teams, so of 3 to 5 folks associated with each of those 9 strategies. And then over the next year and a half, the additional 9 strategies that will kick off. Those teams, as I said, will work with others, including partners, that understand how we're doing, what we should be doing differently, present plans through their executive sponsor back to the executive team, and ultimately some of that will come to you where it involves commission action in service of budget requests or changes to our reporting work or other sort of commission level activities or decisions that we may be asking you to make in order to support the implementation of those strategic plans or of those strategic activities. So that's the model. We will kick off those first 9 teams in January. We're finalizing that. We have leads for each of those, but we're finalizing the staffing over the next week. Those teams will be relatively small, 3 to 5 folks each, cross office representation. So we're really, one of the opportunities the strategic plan gives us is to break down some of the silos within the agency and ensure that when the strategies are written in a way, whether intentional or not, that I think they support the concept of inter-office work, right? There's not a strategy there that you can assign to our community college office alone, or to our grant scholarship office alone, or to our workforce office alone. Many of them, all of them require some level of inter-office effort, and that's how we're developing these teams. I would welcome, in particular, any feedback about the prioritization. While I would have loved to kick off this work for all 18 strategies immediately, it's a tall order, right? This is even to get 9 going with 3 to 5 member, really more like 5 member staff teams, and the associated workload there is a pretty significant undertaking. So that's why you see the begin now, begin midterm, begin later. I think the packet notes that by midterm, we really mean probably in the 3 to 6 month from now window. So in mid 2025, by mid 2025, we will have begun the midterm initiatives, and then begin later would mean more like starting in late 2025. Again, one of the most important things I want to stress is the fact that we may not be beginning our planning work with a strategy until later doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. For almost every one of these strategies, we have existing work underway that is aligned with that strategy. It's really a matter of the point at which we will start to stock take. How are we doing? Is it the right work? What should be different? What should we be doing more of or requesting support to do more of in order to advance that particular strategy? So that will begin later for some of these, that process of analysis and planning will begin later for some of these strategies. So with that, welcome any questions, comments, suggestions, requests.
Commissioner Harden.
Yeah, Ben, thanks for the update on the strategy. Just from a 50,000-foot view, what was the process by which you prioritized, which ones go now versus midterm versus later?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, we actually did have some criteria that we used. Let's see if I can recall that as Ramona and I assessed them. So it had partly to do with our assessment of the urgency of the strategy, right? There was certainly some consideration of that. Partly to do with the relationship between the potential relationship between the strategy and the legislative cycles. So not to get too deep into the weeds on this, but really in order to deeply inform our work and the commission's work on the 2027 budget request, planning will need to begin soon. Right, so a strategy that's denoted here as begin later is less likely to inform our 2027 budget request because of the early nature of the agency's involvement in preparing the budget. So that was a consideration. Finally, sort of a staff capacity, sort of existing effort and staff capacity. I think I'm trying to balance the fact that, and I alluded to it earlier, some of these, I think we have robust work underway. And so a lot of what the planning team will be doing is sort of taking stock of that and maybe tweaking it or making it more prominent, trying to add, recommending adding some support or resources to those efforts. In other cases, this planning team will conclude that we're really not doing much currently. And actually that planning team itself may fairly quickly morph into an action team that's starting to take what actions it can consistent with their existing job responsibilities to move it forward. And I didn't want in the begin now category, all of one kind or another. I wanted some balance. I didn't want all of these teams to have to turn into major work teams, right? And neither did I want them all to be kind of planning teams. So those were some of the considerations. But to be honest, it could have looked differently. I mean, these were very subjective calls, and we certainly would welcome admissions feedback on the prioritization question as well.
Mr. Yamasaki.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm just curious how we'll be updated on the progress of the strategies. And so like the first one, let's just say begin now, relevance, foster equitable workforce outcomes. So I would know what that means.
Yeah.
And what kinds of things are happening that we can know progress is moving.
Yeah.
And so I just am curious how we'll be updated on it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually just reviewed yesterday a single page template that has been proposed that we use for the quarterly reports the commission would receive for each of the strategies. So that template in a fairly simple and high level way describe what we're doing, how we're making progress, where there may be challenges, and would allow the commission to get that view, I hope, of our action to change the strategy. So yes, more to come, but we are very conscious of the importance of having a regular reporting system for the commission. Again, that to be roughly quarterly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. Ben, not afraid of this, but this is an implementation of a new strategic plan, which takes sort of reorientation of our work and not overlay on it. So I'm wondering, to what extent is this simply workload on top of everything else that they're doing, or the restructuring or redirecting of that work? I'm concerned about how big this gets for staff, and is there a way in which we learn from this something we get to quit doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. In my description of this to staff, I have emphasized that while these team members are being asked to undertake some additional responsibility at the outset in the assessment of what we're doing currently, what we should be doing. So in that planning process, when it comes to the work, when it comes to implementing those plans, this will involve changing what we do. And it cannot be seen simply as a overlay or additional work. There will, as the docket item notes, these teams will have the opportunity to say, here's what we should be doing differently. Here's what we should stop doing. And here are some things that we will need to add in order to get to the goal. the adding part, likely means going through a process of requesting capacity, requesting funding. I mean, several of these strategies pretty clearly call for legislative support to better resource certain types of activities, right? So we can't do that without the legislature's support. So they exist in this strategic plan, partly as a reminder to the commission and to the commission staff that when we're preparing a budget request for 2027 will be our next opportunity, direct opportunity. We will probably be placing some emphasis in those areas. So, yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious of the fact our staff is at full, you know, they're fully tapped, right? Our workload is high, they're highly productive, and it would be unrealistic to expect them and us to simply add a whole bunch of new lines of work without finishing.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I'd just like to underscore that because at least in my experience with various organizations and types of organizations, both nonprofit and business, it is fairly usual that even with a strong strategic plan, that it kind of seeps back into an overlay, which I think is one of the reasons that strategic plans, people tend to refer to them as getting put on the shelf and not acted on. We really are looking with Ben's commitment and then his top leadership's commitment at changing the way we do some of the work here at HECC. And at prioritize making sure what we have set out in the strategic plan truly is prioritized in the work. And that is, as you can imagine, or as you have experience with, is just a way higher level of difficulty. Because all of us in our work lives are used to doing things a certain way or having certain tasks that naturally, because of deadlines or other things, end up being prioritized. So this is going to be a difficult and challenging process. And we, as I say often, we are very fortunate to have the committed and talented staff that we do. But doing this work, especially as the universe around us has changed, and making sure we are looking at our processes differently, we are eliminating unneeded processes or steps, and that we are taking the leadership role we were born to as an agency, which goes beyond a regulatory or a reporting role. And I think that's the important thing to remember. What we set out in the strategic plan really is a strong leadership position for the state and for the staff. And that is at least somewhat different. It's an evolutionary, it's not, hey, it's a whole new ballgame, but it's evolutionary different from, I think, how HECC has operated in the past. And I'm saying that, and even if it's redundant, just to emphasize that the staff will need our support, our encouragement, sometimes our prodding on this, and that this reporting process that is laid out here is very important. And I don't want to go on without thanking at least one more time, Commissioners Simnett and Fajardo and Heyman for their work on behalf of all of us, getting the strategic plan to the very good state it's in. I was actually excited, which is a strange word for me to put with strategic plans, when I got to this item in the agenda review and saw how logically and cleanly Ben and staff have set out these next steps. And the whole thing of not having, I'm used to seeing a complicated spreadsheet and one person's name at the top and, and 20 different steps, a lot more, or 40, a lot more than we have. And so to have this crisp and clean and to have a team lead and to know it's going to be a team responsible for each one. So anyway, I was just want to thank everyone involved on staff and from this commission, and especially you, Deb, for giving us this strategic plan, which I think is exciting, and for committing to the tremendous amount of work, but very important work that it's going to entail.
Well, thank you. I mean, the commission really gave us the plan, and it's exciting for me and for staff to have the opportunity. One thing that I'll note about our approach to implementation that's new for us. So there's several things actually, but the one I'll call out is that it pushes responsibility for this planning and implementation effort very deeper into the agency than we've typically done. So these strategy implementation teams who will be doing the initial assessment and providing recommendations to the executive, or ultimately in some cases to the commission on how to proceed. They will be primarily non-management staff. They will be program staff, people who know and are in the kind of operations of the agency. They will also be the teams are mixed. They also include policy folks who help out in the policy realm as well. And I think that's an important lens. But it's I think my main point here is we're going a couple of levels deeper into the agency where a lot of expertise resides, and we're creating opportunities for leadership that we maybe haven't done as much of in the past. So I'm excited to see what we learn from these teams. There's a lot that executive leadership of the agency and the commission can learn from staff who have been doing, in some cases, doing this work for a long time or maybe a short time, but have a lot of understanding about the real world kind of issues associated with learners and institutions and employers. And it feels a little experimental for us, but I'm excited for it.
Well, that's also a good thing. And I think, just to get further in the organization, this whole notion, I think it's difficult to have, when we haven't been forced to do it, for people who have to operationalize these things to see, oh, this is different.
Yeah.
We are coming from a different lens. Even if a lot of the work is the same, our lens is now a leadership lens. And we do have control over some of these processes and either how complex they are, or how direct they are, or how responsive they are to the priorities we've set and the students. So thank you again. And also on the reporting that you raised question, we will, Guthrie and Ben will be looking in the next couple of months. So by spring or before spring, we'll have just a slightly different way of organizing our meeting material. All of these priorities obviously don't fall neatly into one category. So that's going to be a little tricky, but we will also structure our meetings in a way that highlights this is our work and this is who we are. And I think that's what I want to emphasize. It's not just, oh gosh, these are going to be different reporting mechanisms. As heck, this is who we are. This is what we care about most. And we want to reinforce that with staff as well as with the public and with our partners.
Are we gonna, are we gonna, anytime have any, enforcement reports from staff carrying out the strategic plan from the team?
Sure. Yes, I mean, I think we're very open to that. We don't haven't made any decisions about that. Sort of cadence of reporting and the who and the when, other than a general notion that on a quarterly basis, he would be getting updates. It's at least in a written form about our implementation progress, strategy by strategy. But yeah, I think it would be great to, from time to time, permit those teams or the team lead to come before the commission and talk about what they've learned, what they're proposing.
I'd love to be able to put, a face to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that it would be great at every meeting to have these goals and priorities and strategies in front of us.
Yep.
To be able to reference as so I can see some connection between the report and the goal and the strategy implementation. It just would be useful for me to know that all the time.
I was even wondering if there's a way to post at least the goals. Even if it's moved, Guthrie, and we have other people using this, but if there's a way to have a big display of just the top line, so even if we aren't talking directly about it, it's kind of a reminder to us. Yeah, so you might think about that. That's from the beginning. I was thinking, okay, where's the goal? Let me display this.
T-shirts.
Yes.
Each person has a different priority.
Okay, thank you very much for your, with this and enthusiasm. And again, thank you, those who did the heavy lifting on behalf of all of us. We appreciate it. Okay, Guthrie, how are we doing?
We are going to check, if Susie or Veronica, if you could come off mute and just test our audio in the room, that would be fantastic.
I am happy to test. Can you hear me?
Nope,
Oh,
nope,
Oh,
okay.
no.
We're gonna transition to run all the audio through my laptop.
Oh,
Because we
they're
have,
flexible.
let's see, Veronica, can you try again, please?
yes, I can still hear you. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Do I need to speak more loudly?
No, you're all right, but can we do a test? Could you say something, Ben?
Yeah, Veronica, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Ben. Thanks.
Okay, so I think we'll just have to speak very loudly and distinctly, and I will be following up with IT on this. I will just quickly note, commissioners, apologies for not noting this at the beginning of the meeting. This is awkward to say now, but if you haven't ordered your lunch, the deadline ends in 15 minutes. And we can go back. It's, yes. And do we still have Carrie Rothy online? Carrie, I've just promoted you. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, so my name is Kari Rothy. I've been teaching math at Mount Hood Community College for about 25 years. I'm just here because I was asked by our association president to represent our school. I'm alarmed at the current trend to dismantle and do away with developmental math classes at the community college level. I have colleagues in California where this has already been tried, lamenting their ability to simply teach algebra in a coherent manner. And I predict that this movement is not going to be quite as successful as the salesmen from other states are leading you to believe. I do teach a lot of those remedial math classes, and I can assure you that most of my students do not fit a profile of what a typical college student is. The average age of our students is 27, not 18 or 19. Last year, only 42% of our math students were actually in that 18 to 20-year-old age bracket. So that's less than half of our students are what we typically think of when we think of college age. The vast majority come to us after years of working, being a stay-at-home parent, going through drug and alcohol treatment, dropping out of high school, or being in trouble with the law. The list is long. They come to remember what they forgot, to be retrained for new jobs, or to fill the gaps in their education that are currently holding them back. One of my students spent her childhood running from bombs and hiding under bushes at night. Another of my students was in his 70s when he came to me. He wanted to take an arithmetic class after he had finally learned how to read. I understand the desire to reduce the number of entry and exit points because it is at these points that attrition occurs. So a shorter path would be very helpful for a lot of students, but I am asking you to please, let's not throw the baby out with the bath. You can't expect a person who's still struggling with how to multiply negative numbers or how to calculate the area of a basic shape to be successful in a pre-calculus class. They need strong algebra skills to have any hope of passing that class. You can't expect a person still struggling with calculating percentages or averages to be successful in a statistics class. They need way more than just a little extra support on the side. This current trend to abolish developmental math classes seems short-sighted at best. It's just a fad. The people who most need what community colleges provide will no longer have the classes available to fill those holes in their understanding if we take them away. They'll no longer be able to build the knowledge they need for success, to earning advanced degrees, or to enter challenging careers. And I predict that in 10 years, we're going to be right back here trying to figure out how to help all of the adults that have been left behind by this current trend that's going on. There needs to be a way for students to learn some of that foundational material that is coherent and not piecemeal. Community college represents a second chance for most of our students. Dismantling developmental math classes undermines the mission of our community college system, and it institutionalizes the concept that some adults just don't deserve the education that we're currently providing. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it.
And I do not believe we still have Christopher online. He had to leave. Nate will be rejoining later, or we'll get written testimony.
Okay, thank you. And is there any other public testimony?
That is all, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, with that, we are going back to, and thank you, Guthrie, for patching us in. Okay, we're going back to strategic activity, and is Amy Cox, Dr.
Can we check on Kyle?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Two.
Yes, I don't know if
He's.
this is the scrambled agenda. We're putting it all in the poll and
Yeah.
drawing out item numbers.
I could have noted at the outset, I'm sure many of you are aware, the legislature is in session today. They have committee meetings this morning, and then they're in a one-day or several hour special session, I think, starting this afternoon. So there's a lot going on in the Capitol. We have staff there, including Kyle, who has not yet joined.
Well, when Kyle is able to join, we will go right to him. In the meantime, is Amy Cox with us, one way or another?
She is probably not. Yeah, so far ahead of our agenda.
I'm ready with 9.2 and 9.3.
Thank you. We are at 9:02. Happy to be there. Happy to be somewhere where somebody can talk. It's right. Somebody named Guthrie said to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. I'm here to you today to present two brief pro forma items. This is 9.2, the annual agency rule review of administrative rules, and 9.3, the annual 5-year rule report. The first one is simply a review of all the administrative rules that this body has adopted over the last calendar year. I will note that should it be adopted, we will update it to include any additional rule actions adopted at this meeting. And all of the materials detailed in it have already come before this body in more detail. 9.3 is a 5-year review required by statute of permanent rules adopted in the year of 2019, of which there were, excuse me, wrong report, 12 administrative rules adopted across 4 actions, including scholarship programs for children of deceased or disabled public safety officers, Oregon Teachers Scholars Program rule, Oregon National Guard Tuition Assistance Program, and finally, from post-secondary finance and capital, the capital infrastructure repair and renewal distribution formula rule. These sets were all reviewed by program staff to assess whether they achieved their intended effect, did or did not overestimate their fiscal impact, whether they require amendment or repeal, whether there's a continued need for the rule, and whether it has had an impact on small business. For all of these rule sets, staff concluded after a review detailed in the report that they did achieve their intended effect, they did correctly estimate their fiscal impact, they do not require amendment or repeal, there is continued need for the rule, and they did not have an impact on small business other than that anticipated in their original filing. I will now open the floor for questions, and this is an action item for both of these reports.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, that was a very clear report. So these are two separate items on 9.2. The rules report 2024. Can we have a motion, please?
Move to approve.
Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. On 9.3, which is the Oregon Administrative Rules Report 2024. Motion, please.
Move to approve.
And a second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes also. Okay, let me try to unscramble this agenda a little. I skipped over with everything else, the minor item of electing the head chair and vice chair, which is fine with me. But anyway, let's go back and check that off the list, and that's an action item. And you saw that it's the calendar year, the annual requirement. So I recognize Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to renominate, if that is the appropriate method, our chair and vice chair. Sandy Rose chair, Greg Heyman as vice chair, to continue for another year term. And I do so with great pleasure. It has been a fantastic year. I want to say that I have appreciated the learning sessions. I have appreciated their emphasis on making really strong connections with our partners, and in particular the visits to the campuses. And just the careful leadership of our meetings and helping and guiding us through the strategic plan process. It's been a great year. I would be delighted to have that same leadership for the next year.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Thank you, but is there any discussion or questions? Or do you want either one of us to go out of the room?
Can we make you do speeches?
Yeah.
We'd like to hear no campaign. Nice job. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. They have us for another term. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your confidence and your kind words.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very appreciate it. Okay.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair. Who moved and who approved?
I moved.
You moved, you seconded? Okay.
I'm getting reports that my typing is coming in loudly on the meeting, so
That's fine.
I will
Cease.
attempt to take some handwritten notes. Yes.
So the tags are working. The tags are working, so people can't get into us. But our tag in terms of typing is working.
The pen never fails.
Too far forward. It's loud to them. It's very loud. Okay, we're adapting. I think, Guthrie, or we had a place where we could take a break and then we can come back to either Dr.
So
Yes.
and Amy is on her way back from the Capitol. I'm not sure about Kyle, but Amy's on her way. So I think if we take a break, we have like a couple of options.
We're gonna shuffle these cards.
More coffee.
And we're gonna take a break right now for 10 minutes. We'll come back to this.
Okay.
Fun, folks.
We're recessed for a break?
We're recessed for a break until 10.
Okay. We will resume at 10:20. We're recessed for a break. Okay, we are off mute.
We are all, folks, we are back again. We are, to the extent we're connected with folks in the rest of the world, we are connected. Thank you all for your flexibility.
Go.
Okay, and we are ready to go, and the next item is. It's just, it's not necessarily next on our list. Is item 9.1, key performance metrics report with Dr. Amy Cox.
For the KPMs, we have 25, yes, 25 minutes scheduled.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you so much, Chair Rowe. Good morning. My name is Amy Cox. I am the Director of the Office of Research and Data here at the HECC. It is a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. I was at the Capitol and it feels just sort of like coming home to present at a commission meeting. So it really is a pleasure to be with you this morning. What you have in front of you is not an action item, but an informational item. These are the agency's key performance measures. These are a number of measures that we put together and track every year for the agency for submission to the legislature and DAS, the Department of Administrative Services. They usually come to you a little bit earlier in the fall. We were waiting for some information from ODE that was a bit of a good news story, so certainly worth the wait. I'll get to that in just a moment. Guthrie, can you slides?
Slides, we don't know, we haven't tried that yet.
I can do so. Maybe you can. Would it be better if I did it?
I will have them in a moment.
Okay, great. I'll just keep going. The key performance measures are legislatively adopted measures. They were adopted in 2017, and they track progress toward really the state's educational attainment goals, in particular 40-40-20. Can you scroll? Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Guthrie. They look at the number of students in high school who are earning college credit, the percentage of those high school graduates who go on to college, what the affordability is like once students are in college or university, using the term college broadly, and then some 3 different measures of completion: community college completion and transfer rates, university graduation rates, and workforce training participation employment rates. And then lastly, what the earnings are 5 years later after graduation for the college and university graduates. We also look at 40-40-20 and track its progress over time and how these will be contributing to it. And then lastly, you all may remember my requesting your input on a survey about best practices of boards and commission members. Boards and commissions, we'll look at those results as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is an estimate of the number of credits that high school graduates earn by the time they graduate through the partnerships with the community colleges and public universities. So this is college credits earned by all high school graduates. It does not include things like AP or IB. This is really focused on those partnerships with the colleges and universities. And you'll see that in the most recent year of data, it's about 9, just under 9 credits. That includes graduates, high school graduates who earned no college credit. It is, I think the main point of the story here is that it has risen again this year after really quite plummeting during the pandemic, right? When the pandemic hit in spring of 2020, these partnerships in particular suffered. They were trying to scramble to not only teach students, but to abide by requirements being put out by multiple sources, the federal government, the Oregon Department of Education, the HECC, and there were a number of students who just simply didn't enroll in that spring term.
as they had planned to. But we have seen in the last couple of years that continue to climb back up to where it had been around 9 or 10 credits, almost there before the pandemic. Next slide.
On these slides, if we need questions for clarity, especially as we go on, if that's all right.
Absolutely. Please feel free to interrupt.
So, thank you so much. Just a quick question. I historically had some concern about whether or not the credits are earned are actually applicable to something that happens post-secondary. And that's more granular question, but I wonder if we have any evidence that we've made progress in terms of the credits they are earning are actually applicable to the learning.
Commissioner, Chair Rowe, Vice Chair Heyman, thank you very much for this question. This is a question of ongoing concern. I don't have new data to apply, but this is a question of ongoing conversation, especially in connection with the hard work around community college to public university transfer. Just trying to make sure that these are aligned. We are hoping to have some new insight into that this coming year that I don't have right now. But certainly the encouragement and the guidance from a program level has been to align these course offerings more with those common course standards or common course in the core transfer map. But of course, some of them are also career technical education. They're not all around transfer.
Commissioner Martinez.
Thank you. Also, is there work being done for the rural and frontier schools? I know that in our area in the past, there has been access, and due to a lot of it, the requirements of the teachers, and we just don't have them with those requirements anymore to be able to award the credit. And a lot of our high schools had up to their full AA, and now they're lucky to get one credit. Class.
Commissioner Martinez, this is a very good question. I don't know the answer to this. I know in the past, and where we're at today, but we'll follow up with you. In the past, I know almost all high schools in the state, like well into the 90s, had some of these course offerings. Now, that doesn't mean that every student is perceiving themselves in them, right? There may be a different kind of access issue. But where we're at today, like whether that has shifted in the last few years, especially around the pandemic, I'm not sure. But there are some things that we could look at in the data that I'd be happy to follow up. What is the sort of like zip code coverage, for example? Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Yamasaki, then we're going to move. Okay.
Yeah, just one other question. It would be really interesting to me because these are credits and we know, let's say if someone's taking accelerated credit in math, that might be a 4-credit class. Now, and so is there any way, I know that we talked about, are these like, are they general education transfer? Are they CTE transfer? So that we could just get some examples of what kinds of courses are these that they're taking?
Commissioner Yamasaki, it is a good question. They range pretty widely.
Do they?
Yes, but and they don't have much like transfer. They don't have common names, right? So it can be hard to just tally them without sort of pouring line by line over 1,000 courses. But I'll see if we can't put something together to try to get a sense. Next slide, please. This is the college going rate. This is the percentage of Oregon high school graduates from Oregon public high schools who go on to attend a 2-year or 4-year institution nationwide. It is put together by our colleagues at the Oregon Department of Education. This year, they changed the way they measured this. So it's the percentage, a little bit, a lot, but it's the percentage of students, of high school graduates who go on to enroll in college within 12 months of their high school graduation. Okay, so it is not a full gap year, if you're following that. So, so if you were up at night comparing these slides to last year's slides, you would, the numbers wouldn't quite seem to match up, and that's the reason. However, with their generosity, we asked them to calculate them going back. So the trend line here shows this new measure for the whole slide. And the piece that I want you to know more than anything is that it rose. The college going rate rose this year, and it rose for students overall and for students in across racial ethnic groups. So this is a welcome bit of news because it's the first rise since the pandemic. I know 21, 22 high school graduates feels like a long time ago. It is almost the end of 2024. The reason for that is because it takes ODE some time to process their high school graduate data and then to do the calculation with enrollment in the following year. We're hoping to have some updated data for you next summer. Won't be a whole year maybe, but I don't have it a lot sooner than that. But if you come back in February, you'll hear the Oregon Promise Report, give you an inside scoop. Next slide.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On that. If you go back, when you look at all students, and the significant drop, in the last decade, if you went back to 2000, do you know off the top of your head about what it was in 2000? Is all of, I'm trying to discern if all of the drop is in the past decade or if it's just the continuation of the trend we all know.
Chair Rowe, it was declining in the earlier trend. I don't have this new measure data to go back, but using the old measure, we did see a decline from
2000.
Yeah, something more on the order of 63 to 65%, down to about 61%, 60%. And then we saw this bigger drop. I will say also nationally, Oregon does remain far lower than the national average. The national average is 62% for this year, for the 21-22 high school graduates. Yeah.
So there is no answer potentially, or no easy answer to this, but this is something we should keep in our heads with all of the other work. This really is tremendously concerning. And it's not just a matter of public relations or gosh, if we told a better story. Again, this goes to the work we all do, but this is something we just have to keep in mind. Yes, Commissioner Cooper.
Thanks, Chair Rowe. I wanted to see if y'all could provide a comparison with these rates compared to proportionally to high school graduation rates over time, to see if equity outcomes have been exacerbated since the pandemic.
Chair Rowe, Commissioner Coker, if I can make sure I understand your question properly. We do know that high school graduation has trended upward. Certainly the pandemic, challenged a lot of things, but over time, the high school graduation rate has trended upward. It's trended upward faster for students of color than for white students. So those equity gaps by race ethnicity have closed over time in high school graduation. Tell me, knowing that, what the additional piece you're looking for. Do you want to see them mapped on the same chart? Would that help?
I think I would like to see something that so we can compare the gaps in achievement between Black box students in terms of high school graduation rates versus the achievement gap for college going rates to see if how we're doing at connecting these graduating high school students to colleges, and if that gap is something that we are needing to fill. Because if that gap is staying proportional, then that means that we're fulfilling our responsibility to those students and connecting them to higher education opportunities. And if that gap is expanding in terms of college going rate, but the high school rate's narrowing for the high school graduation rate, then something is missing connecting those students to larger opportunities after high school.
If I'm understanding you correctly, almost like if we stack them.
Yeah.
So what we know is that from a couple of years ago, I don't have updated data, but we will have. It'll be a slightly different measure, but we will have insight into this at the Oregon Promise Report in February. But this this issue of, for students who, it's not directly related to Oregon Promise, I'm not trying to, but, in other words, if you look at, say, ninth graders, you know, how many of them graduate from high school and go on to college versus how many of them don't make one of those transitions. We know that gap is quite wide by race ethnicity. The last time we looked at this a couple of years ago, a few years ago, which was prior using data up until the pandemic, we saw gaps on the order of twice as high. And I can send you a resource for that.
That would be really great. I'd love to see these comparisons because it looks, if high school graduation rates are increasing for all races and ethnicities, but college going rates are decreasing, then there's a key element there that we need to be improving upon in order to connect these students to further post-secondary education, workforce development training, and that's at this point that seems to be the missing link in our education system, and then that's exacerbated on to our Oregon's workforce problems. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay,
Next slide.
yes. We'll move ahead.
This shows the affordability index that we put together every year. This is an estimate of the percentage of students who cannot cover the cost of college and university with their expected resources. Therefore, because we're looking at the percentage of students who cannot cover the cost, what we want is it for it to be zero, right? We want it to be zero. It is available for students who filed FAFSAs or ORSAs, the Oregon Student Aid Application. Those are the students for whom we have financial data, right? What you'll see is that it trended downward. We talked about that last year. And that was a good news story. In this most recent year of data, it's trended upward a little bit. That's not good. The reason for that is largely because of the waning of federal supports that came through during the pandemic that both supported institutions to help them keep tuition costs down and allowed institutions to provide some additional grants to students. So as those went away, we did see a slight increase again in the number of students or percentage of students. I want to point out, however, the one counter result to this, and that is for Native American, Alaska Native identifying students, the yellow line at the bottom. You'll see that continue to trend downward. And what's happening there is the institution of the Oregon Tribal Student Grant. So it's a very striking and immediate effect of that financial support.
Mr. Coker.
Thank you, Tara. I wanted to ask if this included cost of living, takes into account cost of living, or if it just accounted for books and tuition.
Chair Bro, Commissioner Coker, it takes into account housing, tuition, fees, transportation, books, personal expenses. These are estimations of the total cost of attendance that are put forward by each of the institutions.
Thank you so much. I would love to see if given the governor's focus on housing in this biennium's budget, if there is any if there are any initiatives or if there is any stipulation in the housing budget for student housing affordability, because that's a large factor in the unaffordability of post-secondary education for all students in the state.
I don't know about the governor's.
Maybe that's something.
Yeah.
But I do know that when we looked at this exact issue about the contributing cost of housing with rising housing costs this past summer, we did see housing being a growing portion of the cost of attendance for students.
Thank you, Kyle. Addressing that.
Chair, members of the Commission, House Director of Legislative and Policy Affairs. There are not specific dollars for student-specific housing issues. However, there is a basic needs coalition that is doing some advocacy work, and that group is slated to present a bill in the 25 session that will kind of force this issue, not with funding, but through the establishment of a work group that will include members of the housing office in the state, as well as tech representatives and other institutional and student representatives to study an issue or and recommendations on this very specific slice of the overall housing issue.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Kyle. Yeah, it's just, that's something that I know that's been brought up multiple times by student groups. And although it's encouraging to see this line trending downward over time, although not the last biennium, it's something that we need to be addressing if we want to increase access to post-secondary education, especially with 4 out of our 7 bachelor degree granting institutions being located in high cost of living areas of the state.
Thank you. We'll follow that with great interest, and please go ahead, Amy, and
Thank you. Next slide, please.
we have great questions. We're going to try to limit them a little bit to the end, just to get through them without a rush. So if you have questions,
Thank you, Chair Rowe. This slide and the next one show graduation rates, if you will. This is for community college students, so it includes more than graduation with a degree. It includes completion of a certificate, completion of an associate degree, or transfer to a 4-year institution, not just a public university, but any of the 4-year institutions nationwide. We consider that a completion of a community college program, if you will. And what we have seen also is some of the sort of ongoing impact of the pandemic here. In the most recent year of data, this rate declined slightly by about a percentage point. It rose steadily up until the pandemic. And then it started to decline, and that has continued as we give students 4 years to make that completion, credential seeking students. And we see it hasn't quite hit the bottom yet, or maybe this is. We'll see what happens next year. I do want to point out the access on the bottom is not the year of graduation. It's the year they entered, the year they first became enrolled, because we track students as a cohort, right, until they graduate. The good news story here, though, is that the gap by race ethnicity is somewhat narrower than it was a decade ago, and that maintained through the pandemic. So that is actually a bit of a good news story here. Next slide. This shows the graduation rates, bachelor's degree graduation rates for public university students. We give them, this is a 6-year graduation rate. So for first-time freshmen who start their university career going full-time, we track those students for 6 years. And this represents the percentage who graduated within that time. This rate declined in the most recent year. The line for all students is right behind, in black, right behind the line for white students. In orange, it's a little bit harder to discern, but it did fall this year. This is not typical. The university graduation rates have been rising. The only other time we've seen a decline in the last 15 years has been right after the Great Recession. Which, of course, I would argue was less cataclysmic than the pandemic. This is about a 3 percentage point decline. It's pretty notable. It is the case for, these are Oregon residents. When we look at the non-resident students, it's about flat, so it didn't fall. And when we look at it, if you were up late at night parsing these slides, as I can only hope you are, and you're looking also at individual institutions, you might see that they report an increase. Some of them have reported a decline for this cohort. Some of them have reported a rise. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is because they tend to include the non-resident and resident students together. And the other reason is because at the HECC, we have data from all of the universities, so we can track students who might have left one but graduated at another, and they can't do that. So that's the difference.
Thank you so much. And I have a couple questions related to this. First is, and you don't specify, but I just want to know, this is cohort data, so we're looking at all students that enter in this period of time or only first time, full time?
Chair Rowe, Commissioner Hay, Vice Chair Heyman, that is such a good question. And I think I love that question because what you're implying is transfer students, right? Transfer students are not a part of this measure. We have a different measure for transfer students and compare them to first-time full-time freshmen. This is first-time full-time freshmen. We give them 6 years. It's a very standardized national measure used across the country. Transfer graduation is a different thing. And then we look at students who come in with basically midway through a bachelor's degree at the 90 credit level and compare them to first-time freshmen in their junior year, if you will. And what we see there is an increase in graduation rates for transfer students. I have to double check this most recent cohort, but they are consistently lower than their first-time freshman colleagues.
Transfer students are lower at completion.
Yes, that is correct. They have lower completion rates than first-time freshmen, even when we compare them at the same point in their career. They also end up graduating with more credits, at the end of those who do graduate at the bachelor's degree. And those two measures, the fact that completion rates are not as high and credit rates are higher. In other words, they're taking more classes. It's not for lack of taking classes. That are the measures of sort of progress in the transfer sphere that we track every year.
Yes. Thank you.
Follow-up question was in my visits to schools this year, specifically community colleges, numerous institutions called my attention to some pretty significant shifts away from full-time enrollment and part-time enrollment. I'm sure you see that in the data. And yet their success isn't even represented in this data as a result of the way that we define the cohort. And I think there is an interest on the part of the community colleges to find a way of capturing the success rates of it. Looks different, but it's going to require a different time frame, those kinds of things. But we're missing, an understanding of a really, in some cases, majority population of our community colleges. We don't know anything about their success rates by data. So I just want to pass that on. I think the institutions are concerned about finding a way of watching that. I realize that changes KPMs and all that stuff, but
Chair Bro, Vice Chair Schmidt, I appreciate your concern. We do track that bachelor's degree. Two things. One is we do track that bachelor's degree graduation rate for transfer students in comparison with their first-time freshman peers in our institutional snapshots on the front and in the data dashboards. We have it right there to try and publicize it, if you will, and put it out there. It is also part of the annual transfer report. For the community college completion rate, that absolutely includes all part-time students. It absolutely does. It does not restrict it to full-time students. Yes, and it is the precise reason that we give them 4 years, not 3, which is the sort of 150% time toward an associate degree. We give 4 because the vast majority of credential-seeking students at community colleges are enrolled part-time. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Now, this isn't how I understood what you first said. So
sorry.
No, but perhaps you could indicate how we define the cohort and our completion rates in the reports themselves.
Absolutely. It's in the footnote, but happy to, and a bit in the
That's fine.
yes. It's actually in the KPM definition. Guthrie, if you scroll back just a little bit, but what's not there is like how we define credential seeking. That's it's slide 6. That's after the American Association of Community Colleges Voluntary Framework of Accountability. They have a credential seeking cohort, and it's essentially the equivalent of any student who completes 18 credits in their first 2 years, which is the equivalent of about 1 course per term for the first 2 years. And then we call them credential seeking, and we start looking at did they complete a certificate, an associate degree, or transfer.
building on what Greg asked, I'm wondering if at some point, it's actually, I think most of this data I'm going to ask for is present in various reports. But looking at community colleges specifically, even just top line in the aggregate, not by college, not by not by ethnicity and other things, but just looking, can we get a better understanding at some point in the future of that profile? What percent of community college students are part-time and certificate seeking, as opposed to full-time? The percent that actually do transfer to Oregon universities. And also the idea, I don't have a good idea of what percent of transfer students at the universities are made up of students from our own community colleges. And again, even an aggregate, I'm trying not to ask for 10 levels of reports.
Yes,
But at
yes.
some point, understanding how that population has changed over time and what they're seeking, because like Greg, it's just a world of wonder to me, because I think we have an assumption that they are mostly going to college or trying to go to 4-year, and then there's this cohort who are just getting certificates, but it's just far more complex than that. But I still don't have a good aggregate sense of it.
Chair Rowe, we'd be happy to put that together. We have done that previously, and it's overdue for an update. I'd be happy to do so. I will tell you in general, this credential seeking cohort is a slice, and I would say a relatively small slice of community college students in general. And that is because many community college students do not make it into that credential seeking cohort, either because they've returned a year later, like they took one course and returned a year later, their pace is slower, or because they're taking a different kind of coursework, adult basic skills, that's not for credit, or a particular focused class, an individual class for an employer, for example. But we'd be happy to put that together and show you changes.
And when we asked for it sliced 10 different ways, remind us that we requested it as
Yeah. Guthrie, can you move forward to slide 8? Thank you. This is a new KPM just recently, and this is the second year we've submitted it, although we show a longer trend. This is a similar completion rate, but for workforce training participants. This is for participants, adult participants in programs funded by the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. That's a federal act that supports workforce training across the country. Oregon receives dollars through that act that are managed by our Office of Workforce Investments. And this shows among the participants who completed a program, those programs can range widely in duration and an emphasis, but among those who completed a program, what percentage are employed a year later? So this is really the goal of those workforce training programs, is employment. This is 1-year employment outcomes for those participants who completed the program. And it also trended a little bit downward this year. Again, I think this is some of the impacts of the pandemic. That shouldn't say graduation year, that should say completion year. Apologies. Next slide, please.
Thank you. We're going to keep going for a little bit. If you can hold your questions downward.
This shows earnings outcomes in the 5th year after graduation for community college graduates. So those who completed an associate degree or a CTE certificate, how are they doing 5 years later for those employed in Oregon, at least? We can't track, it's a separate issue about tracking across state lines. For those who were employed in Oregon, we do see rising earnings. The green line is current dollars, original year dollars, and the brown line is adjusted for inflation. And the fact that even adjusted for inflation, we've seen this earnings increase really goes to the fact that the value of that college credential, of that post-secondary credential, and it continues to rise, right? It goes to the demand for these workers, and it goes to the fact that despite the sort of national questions swirling, that post-secondary credential is only growing in value. Next slide. This shows the racial ethnic gap in those earnings. The labor market, just as educational institutions and other institutions in our country, other systems in our country, is stratified by race ethnicity. It does have equity gaps, just like our other social institutions. We have seen in this 10-year span a narrowing of the racial gap in earnings. So this is a good news story. Next slide. This is the parallel measure for university graduates. So bachelor's degree graduates, any bachelor's degree graduate, not only first-time freshmen, but anyone who earned a bachelor's degree at an Oregon public university. What is their earnings, their 5th year out? And here we also see it rising over this time period, both in real dollar, in original dollars, and in those adjusted for inflation. Next slide. Here we see the racial gap has widened. It is not clear that these things do fluctuate some from year to year. So I would temper a little both the enthusiasm about the community college narrowing and the university earnings widening. But it certainly isn't the direction we want it to go. We have shown this in previous years as line graphs where you can see the fluctuation. It's just really hard to parse a lot of those things, especially with inflation adjustments and stuff. So we're showing it here, but the downside is it's sort of it's just a slice in time, right? And then the next slide, please. This is 40-40-20. So we talk a lot about 40-40-20. Of course, this is the year of the high school graduating class of 2025, to whom 40-40-20 is aimed. And this is not the high school graduating class of 2025. They're still seniors in high school, right? We don't know what their attainment will be when they're age 25 to 34. This is census data that looks at all 25 to 34-year-olds in Oregon. Including those who come from out of state, having already earned their bachelor's degree, okay? This isn't the cohort, this is just the slice, the snapshot of Oregon, the Oregon population. And what we see here is essentially, you could say stable, or you could say stagnant. The proportion of the population who has a bachelor's degree or more, the proportion who has an associate degree or certificate, the proportion who has some college but not a credential, and the proportion who's graduated from high school only, as well as those in red who are not part of the goal, who have not completed a high school credential. In the earlier part of the decade, we did see growth in the post-secondary portions of this, in particular, the bachelor's degree and more. Certainly some of that growth came from in-migration. Some of that growth undoubtedly also came from rising graduation rates. Next slide. This is 40-40-20 by race ethnicity. You see the huge variation. It is not restricted, because we don't have the census data to do so. It is not restricted to those who are 25 to 34. So this shows many generations, right, of the Oregon population. So it does exaggerate these gaps. Nonetheless, you see how strong the gaps are and why we track this in this way. And then lastly, next slide. Thank you, Jeffrey. This is this slide and the next one are the results of your answers to the survey we put out about the commission's use of best sort of board and commission practices. We've given the answer to each question and the overall, actually, I think the overall didn't make it on here. I apologize. That's an oversight on my part. What you see is we have a number of new commissioners in the last year or so. on the commission, and a number of you reported to us that you chose to answer neutral. Two questions that you hadn't yet gotten experience in your time on the commission. The measure that is the percent is supposed to be the percent is defined as, not supposed to be, is defined as the percentage of commissioners who either agree or strongly agree on that 5-point scale with the different questions. Because of the fact that we did receive multiple responses saying, you know, I chose neutral on a lot because I don't yet have experience with this. I also put down the percentage who either answered strongly agree, or neutral. I'm not trying to say that every neutral answer represents that. I actually don't think you really know. So I wanted to show you both. That's for your discussion and consideration. And with that,
Thank you very much. Final questions from those last slides? It's a very helpful report and encouraging in places, but also can't help but make us wonder, well, is there anything we could do to change different outcomes? But we will continue to. Having the information is crucial to make progress. Thank you. Okay, I don't know, are we going? Aha,
So it's good.
okay. This is our legislative report. Back to 6.0. Thank you very much for fitting us in today. I know you have an extraordinarily busy day.
I'm not sure fitting it in is the right framing. I'm happy to be here. Kyle Thomas, Director of Legislative Policy Affairs. In fact, a number of things to go through today. It's just a little bit of standard legislative update. And we'll review in a little bit more detail. I don't have the benefit of hearing everything that Sarah Foster told you this morning about the governor's budget, but we'll review the 2-page fact sheet that's now posted in your commission materials that provides some detail about the budget. And then a piece of an action item, a piece of business that the commission does every 2 years, which is we will review the else legislative concepts that have to be voted on by the commission in order to be sent to the governor's office and ultimately forwarded on to the legislature. And that is part of the delegation of authorities that the commission has retained for itself. So just a couple of comments on the November election results. More detailed information is in your packet. But I do want to highlight the interesting point in that the Democrats at the state level have reached a supermajority in both the House and the Senate, which in Oregon is 60% of both chambers. So that's 36 out of 60 House seats. It's 18 out of 30 seats in the Senate. This allows a single party, if they so choose, to raise revenue, which requires a 60% vote of both chambers in the state. So that will serve as a boost, I think, potentially to one of the biggest pieces of business that the legislature likely has to accomplish in 2025, which is the passage and funding of a major long-term transportation package. I'll note that these supermajorities fall short of other requirements that exist in Oregon, notably the 67% that's required to achieve a quorum, which was a big issue in the last legislative session. So there does remain the possibility that there can be some of that activity ongoing. And just to round out the other supermajorities, this also falls short of the 80% that's required to retain the kicker for state use and claim some of those resources that were not anticipated at the time the legislature passed this current biennium's budget. There are a lot of new members, particularly in the Senate, where several members were disqualified due to the law that the initiative petition that passed that disqualified a member from running for election if they achieved 10 or more unexcused absences in the state. So we do expect a large degree of committee shuffling in both the Senate Education Committee as well as the House Higher Education Committee. I think a little bit less so on the workforce side with the Senate Labor Business Committee, with the House Labor and Workplace Standards Committee. We will know the names of those members that we will most regularly deal with in the next session in the coming weeks. Sometimes we find out about the middle of December, and sometimes we find out after the calendar turns over to the new year. And there's no, I have not heard rumor about when those names will be available. We are in the middle of legislative days right now. The legislature is here for Tuesday through Thursday. They actually have a special session today to deal with some excess costs that the state has incurred related to wildfires in the 2024 year. But you know, our business is not related to that, but we've got several presentations in front of the legislature over the last couple of days. Today, Jennifer Purcell presented to the House Labor and Workforce Standards Committee with an update on future Ready Oregon. She did the same to the Senate Labor and Business Committee yesterday. Also today, beginning in just a few short minutes here, there's an update on the tribal student grant from OSAC to the House Higher Education Committee. There's an update on HECC IT modernization to the Legislature's Joint Committee on Information Management and Technology. As when Amy Cox yesterday also presented to the Senate Education Committee a live demo of the student workforce dashboards that have been developed and are now available on our website. As we get closer to the 2025 legislative session, and in particular, in connection with this legislative days period, we're hearing a lot more about potential concepts that are likely to be introduced in the 25 legislative session. This list represents a subset of those concepts. While over the course of December and into January prior to session, we will have many, many more contacts with legislators or advocates who are planning concepts and are seeking agency feedback. Nonetheless, there will be several that do ultimately get introduced that we have not been tracking in the lead up to legislative session. All told, typically in a typical long session year, we end up tracking, not necessarily actively participating in, but tracking anywhere between 150 or 200 legislative concepts out of about 2,000 or so that typically get introduced. And as it stands here on December 12th, we only have an understanding of a very small slice of those. But nonetheless, we anticipate a basic needs investment proposal, which would provide institutions with dedicated funds to support critical needs that students may have as those needs are identified through the Benefits Navigators programs that are on campuses. I mentioned the task force on student housing during Amy's presentation. We also anticipate that there will be a bill to propose a work group to craft recommendations for legislation on students with disability. We expect a bill to propose increased investments to open educational resources. We expect a bill to propose policy and funding to develop a statewide reconnect program for adult learners with some college and no degree that would be administered by HECC. A bill to that will expand funding or provide funding to expand dual credit opportunities across the state, as well as a bill to increase the transparency of foundations that are tied directly to institutions of higher education. And many, many more will follow. And at the commission's February meeting, which is its first meeting after legislature meets, I will start to provide, as part of my regular update, quite a long list of the items that are of particular interest as they get introduced. I'll turn now to an update and information on the governor's recommended budget. And I'll note that a 2-page, or I guess it's not 2 pages, I guess it's 4 pages, fact sheet has been posted to your commission materials. And I'll run through that relatively sequentially, just focusing on the items where there is departure generally from the current service level. So first, the governor's budget proposes funding for all post-secondary and workforce entities that are represented by HECC at the level of $4.39 billion. That's about 6.5% increase from the legislatively approved budget that we currently operate under. and represents a total 14.6% increase from the current service level. Just looking very quickly at the top lines that are related to that for the larger budget items we administer, that means that the Oregon Community College Support Fund, which is funded at state's current service level, is slated to receive $870 million. The Public University Support Fund, again, funded at current service level, and the governor's budget is at $1.08 billion. And the Oregon Opportunity Grant, which is slated to receive a $25 million increase from the current service level, would sit at $354.2 billion. I'll dive into specific program areas at this point, providing information on both what the governor's recommended budget increases as well as what is phased out, or either phased out because of this one-time funding or is not included, was potentially CSL, but not included in the governor's recommended budget. I mentioned the Oregon Opportunity Grant, that's 25 million above current service level. Other financial aid programs that get increases in the governor's recommended budget is the Oregon Tribal Student Grant. This program is funded at $28.5 million. That represents an increase of $2.5 million above the current service level. We have the Oregon National Guard Tuition Assistance Grant. That's funded at $6.6 million, which is an increase of $1.1 million above the current service level. Unlike the tribal grant where the increase is tied to utilization, the National Guard Tuition Assistance Program increase is tied to policy changes. There was a legislative bill that changed that program from a last dollar program to a first dollar program, and that, of course, increases the operating costs. That program, this increase in the governor's recommended budget, recognizes that. There is also a new behavioral health workforce scholarship program in the governor's recommended budget. The policy around this initiative, as well as the larger behavioral health workforce package in general, is still being finalized in the governor's office. Several HECC staff have that meeting next week with the governor's office to talk in more detail about potential bill language there. There's there's a $5 million line in the governor's recommended budget to support that new scholarship program for supporting behavioral health students. There's also $3.1 million in the governor's recommended budget, and that is a transfer from the Department of Education, designed in conjunction with an LC that I'll discuss in a minute, for HECC to take over the administration of a scholarship program that's aimed at culturally and linguistically diverse education administrator candidates. We operate, you're likely familiar with a similar program for culturally and linguistically diverse teacher candidates already through HECC. Pointing out items that are phased out in the governor's recommended budget, there was one-time funding. This has been one-time funding over the past couple of biennia of $5 million in support of college access programs, specifically $1 million each for Aspire, Trio, Year Up, College Possible, and Avid. The governor's recommended budget does not propose a continuation of those funds. Shifting to some other lines now, in terms of other funding that the universities receive, public university state programs are funded at $67-ish million. That's a significant increase from, or decrease, 33% decrease from the current legislative budget. And that is largely due to the phase out of one-time funding. For instance, $10 million that was provided to the Oregon State University in the aftermath of the issues with the Pac-12, $4 million for public universities and one-time semiconductor funding, as well as other funding that was one-time funding that was related to pandemic assistance funds. All of those dollars phase out as they were anticipated to, and that results in a large decrease to that line. I will point out in terms of other institutional programs that are line item funded, what I think I am at least getting the most calls about initially is that the governor's recommended budget does not carry forward the $5.6 million in funding that was dedicated to Benefits Navigator program. community colleges and public universities. State law requires those institutions to maintain those positions. They are required by law to have a benefits navigator. And although they will not receive dedicated funding, I will point out that this funding mechanism is pretty atypical. It is not typically the case that the legislature funds institutions or specific activity that the legislature mandates institutions do in the education space. That's typically seen as what the formula funds are meant to support. So it is entirely possible that that is the view that is being taken here. Although that does create some issues for as how the formula distribution works for individual institutions when it comes to maintaining these funds. I will say, based on every conversation I've had in the last week and a half, this is very high on institutions lists, on advocates lists, and on many legislators lists for restoration through the legislature's budgeting process. Turning to workforce investments specifically, the governor's recommended budget includes, I've already mentioned 5 million of this, but $25.7 million in total funding to expand education and training pathways for behavioral health workforce. The 20 million I haven't already talked about will be in direct grant making to education and training providers in this space. Funding is also included for a few HECC staff to help administer this program. There's also a $5 million general fund investment for pre-apprenticeship programming, and that will be in the housing and construction fields. The administration and policy around that investment will be determined after the conclusion and release of the housing workforce production study that HECC is currently undertaking. For Future Ready, the governor's recommended budget does not include any continued state fund investment for this program. Those dollars were one-time dollars that the governor's essentially not proposing new investment, but she is proposing a reauthorization of $62.5 million in other funds. That's federal funding that's left over and ongoing from the American Rescue Plan Act. This funding is largely allocated, but the $62.5 million reauthorization allows the program and programmatic activity to continue through most of the next biennium. However, after that, if the legislature does not elect to provide additional state funds, the activities related to Future Ready Oregon, or many of the activities related to Future Ready Oregon, will necessarily wind down. Other items that existed in our current budget that do not carry forward in the governor's recommended budget is one-time funding that was general fund for the Oregon Conservation Corps. This is a young adult workforce initiative that is targeted at activities around fuels mitigation and other kind of wildfire preventative activity, although there is, I didn't mention it previously, but there is an advocacy effort underway that may lead to a bill and a funding proposal to continue that funding into the next biennium. And funding was eliminated for the National Career Readiness Certificate Program. Looking internally here at the agency in terms of agency operations, the GRB is generally current service level, but because of the one-time funding, Future Ready funding, Oregon Conservation Corps. Nonetheless, CSL does have programmatic policy impacts to the agency. We do, however, in the governor's budget, receive nearly $6 million in bond funding and $2 million in general funding to complete the IT modernization project that we've been working on for the better part of this biennium. And then lastly, in capital construction, the governor's budget has $422.5 million in authority for the public universities. This largely includes one named project, I guess two, depending on how you look at it, but two projects that are left bonds. There's funding for the Keller replacement project that's being undertaken by Portland State University and parking associated with that. There's also $200 million in capital improvement and renewal funding. So deferred maintenance funding included in the governor's recommended budget. She also includes $20 million in bonding authority, 3 community college capital construction projects, one at Clackamas, one at Klamath, and one at Mount Hood. You probably know that those numbers diverge significantly between the institutional types. Community college bonding is much more restrictive at the state level, in part because of the differences in funding and local activity that the colleges are able to generate, but they're generally limited to $80 million bond matching funds that are subject to proceeds that they bring to the projects themselves. That, I think, in a nutshell, is the recommended budget. You may have questions. I may not have detailed answers, but I'm happy to hear those before we move into LC adoption.
Questions for Con? I have a question, comes very forward. Thank you. Very helpful. So kind of piling on to the questions you were getting on the College Navigator, I would just add for the record that that's another thing I think that Vice Chair Heyman and I could affirm that as we have visited the community colleges, it is very clear the need for these and the benefit they bring. So I recognize that legislatively they are still mandated to continue. But the truth is, if anything, those programs need building and more investment from the state. So just note that our experience in visiting all these community colleges, it's very positive on that.
I do not have the numbers and contacts that the navigators have made, but I've seen the numbers and I recall being astounded. Yes, by the numbers. It is a significant level of service that occurs on.
Yeah, so we hope the legislature is able to get that information. Yes, Commissioner, I'm sorry, over first.
The Chair, I just wanted to ask what the potential consequences for these institutions were if they were to not provide funding for these positions. Unfunded mandates are unpopular as they should be. And if there's not a mechanism to require them to maintain these positions, then my worry is that some of these institutions will fail to maintain these positions if the funding is provided by the state, regardless of if it's legally required or not.
So I'm hardly an expert on the internal institutional budgets. So let's start with that caveat right there. There is the state law that mandates these positions still be maintained on campus. I do think, however, it is likely that what you may see at institutions that would struggle and otherwise pay for them is that activity will be combined with other activity that those individuals are expected to do as part of their job. Of course, that would reduce the contact hours that would be available for students to receive benefits, navigator services. There's also the effect of, I will say on the issue of unfunded mandates, this is an issue that the institutions, I think, the sectors may treat a little bit differently, but what institutions call their CSL very often includes an analysis, and this is, I think, particularly true on the public university side, very often includes an analysis on the unfunded mandates that the legislature has adopted since the last time the institutions achieved their institutional CSL number and received that in budgeting. And so when they receive it again, they basically sort of more or less wipe the slate clean when it comes to the perspective of unfunded mandates. There are distortion effects because the formula does not provide $1-for-$1 the same way line item funding provides for $1-for-$1 to institutions. But those are some general observations I have that help with your question. If Jim were here, I'm sure he would have more.
Also, is there a look at possibly partnering with ODHS for some of these navigator positions because they already have some of those programs at least community colleges with the STEP and.
I'm gonna glance over at Shaway and see.
I'll take that because we're excited to report that we're in very active conversations with ODHS and also I think over time with OHA about streamlining our approach to or the availability of benefits, federal and state benefits to students. without getting into it too much detail, one of the catalysts for that is some new guidance from the federal government about the use of FAFSA data to qualify students for benefits beyond the traditional educational benefits, namely Pell Grants and other educational grants. That data can probably be used to qualify students for other federal and state benefits. So we have a work group that's been meeting and exploring how we can better support students in accessing all the existing benefits that may be available to them. And colleges and universities are rightly concerned that they should not be necessarily reproducing benefit systems. There is certainly a need for food pantries and the like. But to the extent that we can connect students who are eligible with SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, rather than having to, or perhaps in addition to providing them with food on campus, that seems like a place to start. So yes, some good work underway. I should just apply for a small grant from the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association that helps support further policy work in this realm. And excited for
ERDC.
ERDC is on the list as well. I don't know if that's going to be in the first tier, but yes, there is ERDC is among the benefits that we're doing.
Fingers crossed on that.
Yeah.
I have one further question on the high school programs, Aspire and
Geometry.
yeah. Okay, so those aren't refunded. They aren't mandated, right?
Correct. So obviously Aspiring program within this agency, so Aspire activity will continue. All these other programs do have other funding sources. They have increased their activity in response to the 2 biennials worth of one-time funding that they have received. So they have received funding for 2 biennia, but it's not ongoing continuous funding. It has been something they've had to ask for each and every legislative session. That is slated to repeat this year. We have worked in the last legislative session, we've worked with a group of folks representing these organizations on a policy bill that would create this program as an ongoing program, but would not do so with line item appropriations to individual organizations. It would be an ongoing grant program in the HECC that would provide competitive grant opportunities to organizations that either have a notable track record in this mentorship space, or who want to build such programs and have contacts, deep connections with underrepresented communities, and those grants would help them enter
So some of them still may be affected. Is that?
Oh, they will clearly be affected by the lack of if they don't again receive $1 million appropriations. But those programs, none of the programs, as I understand it, are at risk of closure because of the lack of continuation.
Okay, if they don't receive additional funding, ultimately, could you track and report back to us? I'm worried about if we lose part of that piece, which seems a clearly important piece, certainly at some schools, then I'd like for it not to go away without our knowledge of what's being lost and our ability to inform the legislature on that.
Yes, I think some of the reporting that we receive is a little bit limited, and this is actually part of the having a competitive grant program where we can write the proposal and have grant making requirements and reporting requirements. So I would not say that we have robust data on all of these programs activities, but with sort of ad hoc collection with those organizations.
Even a narrative would be helpful. Yes. Want to see what happens. Thank you very much for that report, Kyle. We will move on now, and we might be on.
We actually still have to approve the legislative.
Oh, right. Sorry. Very sorry.
You can keep this brief because we're now about 10 minutes behind.
I can keep it as brief as you want because these concepts have all been reviewed previously with the commission. There is a technical requirement that you vote to approve them. They're all listed in your docket. If at the chair's prerogative, I can stop right there and we can move to the vote, or I can provide your summaries.
If you need more information, commissioners, please say so now. It is in
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes.
The legislative concept proposal regarding the Oregon Opportunity Grant and equity reform. There's an average value in there for student debt. And the mathematician in the room, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm looking for, like a 5-number summary with a bit more information there.
So the values that the statute obligates the commission to work towards in designing a financial aid program under the Opportunity Grant law is not implemented in practice. So the part of the reason that we're moving in this direction with this legislative concept is the legislature has not and almost never has funded the opportunity grant to the levels where the debt shares and the student shares that we assume as part of the shared responsibility model are achievable. The shared responsibility model, I think, also sort of makes some assumptions about what students should and shouldn't be responsible for that probably deserve updating. And since they deserve updating, and since it's a model that is just, yes, it runs in the background of the computer programs that we have that issue financial aid, and then we ignore the outputs because we don't have enough money. We're just proposing eliminating it altogether and moving towards a model that we will develop and have already developed in rule that is more in line with the state's ability to pay. The practical effect of that is limited in present day, but it will no longer require the commission to sort of adhere to this statutory framework that for now and for the foreseeable future does not otherwise statute indicates that we should be seeking to achieve. And there are questions, of course, whether those are appropriate.
Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Even though it wasn't about numbers.
Yeah, I appreciate that it's being looked at, right? And I agree with the first sentence that it's an antiquated framework, basically.
Thank you. Now, any other questions on legislative concepts? If not, can we have a motion to approve, please?
To approve?
To
approve one or all?
All of them. Package of legislative concepts. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Don. Thank you, commissioners. Okay, we have 2 additional items. Reports of both action items, and Shelley is here. Thank you. She is here. Credit for prior learning report. Shelley House.
Are you still able to share?
Yes.
Good morning, Chair Rowe, Chair Heyman, and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Shelley Hansen, and I'm really glad to be here with you today. I work as a policy advisor in the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development, and credit for prior learning is my topic today. So happy to share this report with you. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the first thing that I want to share is really this alignment work that we've been doing. So many of you have heard about credit for prior learning from HECC for a number of years. And in the most recent years, we've really taken this approach of looking at credit for prior learning, short-term certificates like career pathways, wraparound support services, and competency-based education as a package that can be aligned to support students and to really create individualized plans that engage students in their learning in a way that nothing else really does. And so bringing the value of a student's experience and their prior knowledge into a conversation about advising and helping them make that individualized plan, getting them to the right place to get their experience valued and earn credit for that. And then helping them get into maybe a short-term certificate or credential and have success there. And then continue on in their education journey
And so I just want to share with you that I'm continuing to have these conversations. I just did a presentation this week to the Oregon Pathways Alliance, the Career Pathways coordinators. I've talked to apprenticeship folks about this in the last year and just keep this alignment conversation sort of at the forefront because these individual pieces are great, but when you can put them together, it's really powerful. Just want to start there. Next slide. So going back a little bit, this is what the legislature has asked us to do. And so we have a number of goals. And yet, as you can see in the report, I outlined it this year to address each of these goals individually and what we've done in the past year to move forward on those. And so I'm not going to read them to you, but we will dig in on what is reported. Next. So what I asked the colleges and universities to do, including the private for-profit, private nonprofit folks, is to tell me what's happening for students. How are students accessing credit for prior learning? How are you supporting that? How is that increasing? And so they reported back that they are actively working with students to sort of map their prior learning experiences. They're looking at developing crosswalks for credit for prior learning certification so that people coming in with certifications can get receive that credit, earn that credit. They're helping people access CPL through grant scholarship programs. And I think one of the most interesting pieces about that is I talk all the time about how most CPL outside of portfolio usually is not financial aid eligible. And so the fees are paid by the student. They'll figure that out. On the opposite end of that, we have students who are not financial aid eligible for a number of reasons. And colleges have been working with them to provide support to pay for the fees for CPL. And so they're helping people who maybe would have a tougher time getting started in a short-term certificate or a degree pathway to get that kind of first step, first batch of credit. Just two sides of a coin there, but finances continue to be things that need to be worked on. There's lots of things happening with challenge exams and developing those exams, helping students access that. Lots of work on portfolio development. And so this is some continuation of the Future Ready Oregon work as well. Okay, next. Then I asked them to tell me how they were expanding CPL opportunities, which is one of the goals. And there's lots of work going on to expand these opportunities. That was one of the great things about Future Ready. It gave institutions the opportunity to have some funding to pay faculty to develop assessments, to think about what assessing credit for prior learning on a broader scale look like. Some institutions have hired CPL coordinators to bring faculty together and develop crosswalks and assessments. So lots of work happening in this assessment expansion space, which is only going to make accessing credit for prior learning available. Next, we asked them to tell us what they were doing for, I'm sorry, I messed those up. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Okay, so they did, so the first one, I'm sorry, was expanding credit card learning in general. I apologize. The second one is about assessments in particular. And so this is where we get into updating challenge exams, and now they're starting to talk about what happens with the common course numbering courses and how do we assess those for credit for prior learning. Looking at student costs for assessments, ensuring that those costs make sense. Looking at assessments and creating faculty and professional development around how do you create assessments for this, creating space and time for faculty to do this work, and really talking about transparency of materials. Okay, next, this is a little bit of a smaller group. The legislature has asked us to think about supporting people who do this work. And so thinking about how we ensure that faculty and staff have what they need to do this. And another thing that I've been talking to people about is training for credit for prior learning needs to be really broad. Training faculty and departments is great. Training one or two advisors is great. But the more people who know and understand what credit for prior learning is and how students can access it, the better chance a student has when they're talking to someone about their story and sharing their story to get to the right place and to be able to access that. So building that capacity, building that culture where people are sort of doing on the fly assessment of someone and helping them with, maybe this is an opportunity for credit for prior learning because students don't necessarily come to the table knowing that this is an option. So the professional development is really critical. And these are some of the things that institutions have done. So that's the really fun stuff that's been happening, and you're gonna hear more about that this afternoon with the Future Ready Oregon report. And now I'd like to get into something that's a little more challenging. So you've also heard this from me many times. We have some challenges with the data for credit for prior learning, particularly with the community colleges. And because of that, because it's been just recognized as an issue, we've asked the Credit for Prior Learning Advisory Committee to bring together a group of folks from the community colleges, including institutional researchers, registrars, deans, and other leaders, to come together and work with the HECC Office of Research and Data and me to identify what the issues are, what's holding things back, what's causing problems. We know that much more credit for prior learning is happening at the colleges than what is reported. So we're having a really great conversation about what the barriers are, what the challenges are, what it means in different reporting systems, different student information systems, how different colleges have procedures that might be different and are causing some barriers, unintended consequences. And then we're having HECC research and data staff come and listen to that, learn more about it, and working to formulate some options and some recommendations. So we will continue to do that work until we get to a much better place with our community college data. And then on to the public university data. I've been reporting for the last several years that the data has consistently gone up, and it more or less has, but I will admit that I was misinterpreting what was provided to me, which was a more cumulative look on that data, and it was not exactly going up at that regular rate and at the very large number of credits that you'll see in your materials. So in the last week, I've had an opportunity to learn a lot more about that data and how it's reported. And again, work with HECC research and data to right size that. So what's in your materials is going to change, and get you a new report by the end of the day that shows a more clear picture of a year by year comparison for the university data, and just give you that clear picture. So I appreciate your grace in allowing me to provide that updated information. So the next two slides are a little less relevant than they were when I put this together. But the community college data is what it is, that we know that has challenges. The university data that I will provide to you later today will look a little different than this picture. This is still true, still accurate, but there's we discovered a better way to interpret the data this week, and I learned about the assumptions I was making. So we'll have more information for you later on that. Any questions before I go on to the next thing on that database? Okay, so the Credit for Prior Learning Advisory Committee has been working really hard. You haven't seen me come forth for a while with new nominations because we've got a pretty stable group. We do have a couple open spots now, and so it will come with some new nominations in the new year. But they've been working on the Credit for Prior Learning Standards, which you approved and adopted in April. And then they are now coming together a couple of times a year to just ensure that things are going okay with standards adoption. And then they also help review the report and provide context for the report. But they're a great group to work with. Since we have new standards, let's go to the next one. I wanted to share with you, especially for new commissioners, next, sorry. For new commission, oh, sorry, not next, that one. Next. Okay, this one. I'm for new commissioners in particular, want to share with you just this timeline of the Credit for Prior Learning work and the standards in particular. And so we started this work formally from the legislature in 2012. And the standards have gone through a couple of iterations, and now this new revised version. One more. One more. There we go. So this is just a representation of sort of how things have changed over time and why some of those changes were made. Okay, now forward one. And I've been sharing this as well because the advisory committee was really thoughtful in how they tackled that revision work of the standards, and they set forth these guiding principles, which are included in the standards as well. I just wanted to share with you what they were thinking as they dug into that work. Okay, now next one more. Moving on to funding. One more, Guthrie. There's like a delay or something, I'm sorry. Back one.
Oh, yeah, there's a very significant, yeah, this is the slide I'm on.
Oh, okay.
Let me try.
Okay,
Okay.
I think it's fine. I'm almost done.
Sorry.
So as you know, this work's been funded by Future Ready Oregon, and we had a pretty big investment of one-time funding in 22-23. 14 community colleges and 5 public universities received that funding. They did a lot of work in that timeframe. And I'm hoping once we see a couple more years of work, we'll see some improvement in outcomes for students. And I know you're going to get a sneak preview of that today with the Future Ready Oregon report. There's also been a Department of Labor grant, a 5-year grant that supported expanding credit for prior learning and career pathways and leveraging those two things in cybersecurity and manufacturing. And that grant is just about to the end. And so next year, when you see me for this, I will have a pretty good summary of that work and the impact that that has had as well. Okay, now next, and I'm just gonna keep talking, don't worry about it. Okay, this is last slide. This is recommendations. So as you may know, we need to work on data and data reporting. And so we are doing that. I'm really excited to work more closely with HECC Research and Data to improve all of that and gives you a much clearer picture in the coming years. And then I think the next the other recommendation that we have is really about seeking sustainable funding, in particular for student supports. It's really critical, but also to continue the work that's been done under Future Ready Oregon and not lose the momentum. This work is often individualized and can be costly. So recommending that colleges are seeking sustainable funding and also leveraging other funding sources, which we are seeing and sharing when we see those examples.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you for your report. I have a question about your gathering input efforts and if you have reached out to any tribal partners or perhaps the Native American Student Success Coordinator to gather any information on tribal specific learning that might apply where others don't, and there might not be any previous data at all.
Chair Rowe, Commissioner, that's a great question. I have not, I will admit, but I would love to be able to do that and engage that community in particular in this because like any community, there's so much rich experience that people come with to college and don't necessarily know that it can be valued for credit. And so, yes, I would absolutely love to do that outreach.
I think that would be really valuable for the communities and for the HECC efforts to raise rates of completion. I know that there are opportunities to plug in language learning probably really easily.
That makes so much sense. Thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Cook. Thank you, Taro. Thank you so much for this really comprehensive presentation. I just wanted to express concern that it doesn't look like Chemeketa's data is in, or if it is in, then it's infinitesimally small, which is especially an area of concern considering that's one of the larger Hispanic serving institutions in the state, and considering the gaps in educational attainment with the Latino population that we saw in earlier presentations, that's definitely an area of concern for me.
Commissioner Coker, you will be happy to know that Chemeketa is well represented on the data work group and is working hard behind the scenes to understand what the issues are. They do produce credit for prior learning and do award that quite significantly. And they also receive Future Ready Oregon funding. So yes, they're engaged and involved as are most of the other colleges.
Perfect. So thank you so much. I hope that can be, I hope they can get their data in that's soon enough to be reflected on the next presentation. Mr. Naaman.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Real answer the question similar. Because you just look at the data on page 8, you don't know whether it's flawed data or if they're actually radically different performances based on some of the other institutions. But I'm glad to hear that your work group, I'm hoping that one of the things that come out of that is it certainly looks like a couple schools are like really engaged with this and can we learn something from them and sort of that kind of thing. The other one I ask every year is, do we see any movement on credit, competency-based credit? You can say no.
No, I'm going to say yes, actually, Commissioner Hammond. We have seen some work on competency-based assessment. And so competency-based assessment is being used by the EMS, the Emergency Medical Services Consortium. And we haven't seen the data from that yet. They're just starting to implement, but they're the first kind of group that's picked that up in any sort of formalized way. And so I'm hoping next year, I'm hoping two things. I'm hoping that competency-based education report and this report can be consolidated because there's so much overlap and Kyle's helping me with that. And then I'm also hoping to be able to show some comparisons with some of those colleges that have implemented that strategy.
Thank you. I know this is, so I kind of harp on this issue because it's so that I have an ulterior motive with regards to this because competency-based credit or assessment requires to have a really clear understanding of the outcomes associated with a course. And so I think doing this will push us to develop clear outcomes instead of focus on content, and which is going to help with transfer. So it's all fits together. That's okay.
It does all fit together. One of the great things, and I'll just say this final thing, one of the great things about aligning competency-based education and credit for prior learning is that if a student doesn't have all the knowledge to receive credit for the whole course, they can come in and receive parts of the competencies and still be ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, I think what we need to do is to have a motion to accept the report subject to the changes in the data that you were going to make. And we look forward to future reports. So if we could have a motion, so that, thank you. And a second?
Motion. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. And we look forward to the new data and I know you will send it to us. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, commissioners, this is what I'm thinking. We are now behind schedule, but we're caught up on the agenda, if you understand.
Right,
So,
yes.
and I think what we can do instead, we're scheduled for an hour lunch break, which I don't think we need as much time. So I'd like to, with your permission, I'd like to go ahead with the transfer report. And we'll streamline that a little bit, but get that done before lunch and then we'll be back on schedule. And Veronica and John is there to present to us and it's done on Wellington.
Don's sick today, so
Veronica's taking the whole thing.
we can't hear you for I will have to give us a moment.
We'll be quiet and Veronica will speak up. And we'll hold the questions on this to the end because of these technical difficulties, if that's okay.
Right.
Yes, please. I was going to ask you about the presentation, but
Let's just confirm. Veronica, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
yes.
Excellent.
And
Guthrie, can you run the slides for me or should I do that from my end?
It might be easier if you do that from your end, Veronica, just because we are using my laptop for the audio.
Okay.
And if commissioners can just speak extra loud.
Okay, and Veronica, can you hold on just 1 minute? I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to give the floor to Vice Chair Heyman, who, as you know, is our representative on the Transfer Council and has been deeply engaged in this work.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. just, I want to provide sort of a perspective, given my, I don't know, 5 months doing this now, maybe not that long, but just sort of, it's been interesting sort of having a conversation about transfer at this level, and then like actually attending a transfer council meeting. And I appreciate the report, and I'm glad you'll get to the details. I do want an overarching comment is that, which I'll really the framing for me. I think one of the challenges with the transfer council is it is so exclusively focused on the legislation, and that makes perfect sense because they're formed out of legislation, and so they, you know, and you'll see this in the, I think in the report to some extent, they measure our progress, which I think we are, and our progress is accelerating. I want to make sure I'm clear on that. I think we're moving faster now than we were certainly a year ago. You know, our metrics are still pretty focused on are we complying with the legislation, whereas I come into this work with the perspective of are we achieving a goal, and while legislation may represent the goal, it doesn't totally capture the goal, which is, I think, as we as a commission have talked about it, that we would create something that looks like seamless transfer between institutions and to create seamless pathways that moves through the different institutions. And that's represented in our new strategic goal, strategic plan as well. And so what I bring to that is, and I think I'm going to be a little more vocal in the future, is to keep drawing us back to, so, you know, how, to what extent are we actually creating that seamless opportunity for students to, as Amy mentioned earlier, you know, transfer students don't succeed at least as quickly as you know, sort of native students for institutions. And part of that is because transfer is tough and we lose credits and so which is a lost investment on the part of the state and also a lost investment on the part of that student. And so, you know, I just, you know, I'm going to keep focused on what does it really look like to the student and not. And I just think that's going to be an ongoing conversation. And so I want you to know what perspective I'm representing when I go to the transfer council. So
that is very helpful. It's an important distinction that I've only recently understood, that I've sort of felt a disconnect at times. That's sort of the responsibility of meeting the requirements of the law versus our perspective, which mine has all along been, you know, what's the result look like? Are we achieving the goal? So I think understanding that perspective and you continuing to represent both your earned knowledge on that and the commission's viewpoint, that is the perspective we want, not the process perspective, is very helpful. And so thank you for giving that to us now, even before the report. So Veronica, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, I am Veronica Duchois, and I'm the Director for Academic Policy and Authorization. And I do lead this work along with my colleague, Donna Llewellyn, who's the Director for Academic Community Colleges and Workforce Development, and with Kai Thomas, our Legislative Director. As Ben indicated earlier, Donna is unfortunately not feeling well, so I will be doing the presentation today. I will, as Guthrie has asked, I share my slides, and I am hoping you can see those slides, and I will just, Guthrie, could you let me know if you are seeing those slides?
We are seeing them.
Thank you. And so I want to just go first by recognizing that the work we do in transfer is directly connected to our strategic plan, our new strategic plan. And so it was interesting to hear the conversation earlier today, commissioners requesting that we actually make the connection with the reports that they were seeing, the reports that staff bring before you with the strategic plan. And so transfer policy is directly connected to the strategic plan and to two of the goals in the strategic plan: alignment and access and affordability. I think we're calling it affordable access. So I will go on. Legislative background, just the brief legislative background here. The work began at least with under the HECC in 2017 with House Bill 2998, where we focus on the major transfer map work. The effort that went into that, there was a lot of learning, and then we had the evolution of Senate Bill 233 that was passed in the last legislative session, 2021, and that's what's been guiding our work. I want to indicate in terms of what's working well, faculty engagement has been growing. I'm sorry, I went ahead one too quickly. What's been working well? Faculty engagement is high and growing. The Transfer Council is stable and developing institutional memory. And as Vice Chair Heyman indicated, we do believe the transfer work is hitting an acceleration point. The legal structure promotes decision-making and action, and we've had two major parts of that work, the rules for the major transfer maps and the rules for the common cost numbering have actually accelerated and given clearer guidance for how we can do this work. And the common cost numbering work has really now picked up a lot of steam, and it's progressing quite quickly. The challenges, many challenges, building and sailing the ship has, of course, led to some initial delays. Maintaining the common cost numbers and major transfer map work has been something of a strain, both on staff capacity at the HECC as well as the institutions. The process that we're engaged in, although it serves the council well in terms of clarity of guidance and being deliberate, it does take time, and Senate Bill 233 requires a lot of process in it. The communication to students has been a challenge. The work has been happening at the Transfer Council, but getting the dissemination out into the institutions, into the departments, and to the students, we have work to do there. We do recognize that good faith disagreements can hold up the council work, and it's important that we do have the conversations and the clarity of thought to do the best that we can do. And the major transfer maps developed prior to Senate Bill 233 may need work, additional work, because they're being brought into the new structure of Senate Bill 233 and, in a sense, correcting for areas that were not as clear. In terms of accomplishments, progress to date, we have aligned, or should I say, the Transfer Council has aligned 37 courses since it began its work in 2022. It also has aligned the first lecture lab sequence courses, and these courses were a particular challenge because at institutions, the distribution of credits from what's done in the lecture, how many credits are assigned to the lecture and how many assigned to the lab was certainly not in alignment across the institution, and it took quite some work on the part of faculty to come to an agreement about the outcomes of these courses. And as I captured earlier in a slide, the council and staff established the administrative rules to formalize adoption of common cost numbers and to guide ongoing alignment. So highlighting particularly the success story with biology and chemistry, as I indicated, the challenge of mismatched lecture lab requirements, and that was statewide. And those two particular faculty subcommittees were able to align lecture lab courses with consistent requirements and propose the teach out plan for sequential courses. So in some cases, because of this new alignment, because of the way the series, the biology and chemistry as separate series of courses, they would be in misalignment for students who are currently in these courses. So there will be teach out arrangements for students who are taking courses under the old regime of sequences so that they're not left out in the cold, and new students taking these sequences would be under the new framework of for common cost numbering. And the model that was adopted is that each institution gets to decide on the distribution of lecture and lab credits, but in the end, the total number of credits and the learning outcomes will be the same for all students, and receiving institutions will accept them and apply them with the same number of credits for the same learning outcomes. In terms of success, courses aligned for 2025-26, you can see them as they're ranked here. We work from a listing of courses that are most commonly transferred. And so you can see there were business, biology, chemistry, economics, math, and sociology courses. And in many of these cases, the faculty subcommittees saw the advantage of working on a series of courses. So they knew what was in course number 1, course number 2, course number 3, which made it more efficient actually for staff capacity and faculty capacity in terms of investment in getting the work done. So in terms of faculty involvement in the work and engagement, we had 153 faculty across 23 institutions. And in terms of the numbers, 139 hours of subcommittee meetings. On the HECC staff side, the support and tools we provided included an updated common cost numbering handbook and orientation sessions for faculty, monthly meetings, annual surveys to collect feedback so we could be on a cycle of continuous improvement, and monthly common cost numbering co-chairs meeting to decide on the agenda and how the work was going, to do any catch-up or adjustments that needed to be done. One of the new areas should I say, mechanisms that were introduced both on the major transfer maps and the common cost numbering side, a campus buddy system. So the faculty in the subcommittee actually have connections to individuals at all of their campuses, whether it's in the community colleges or the universities, to keep abreast within the departments so all faculty know what the conversations are about common cost numbering and are cued in and can provide feedback. And that was intended to help with communication, dissemination, and agreement and alignment about the work that was being done, that is being done. In terms of implementation, most community colleges and public universities have adopted approved common cost numbering information. There's consistent adoption, however, has not been reached. So when at the time that we produced the report and the slides, 6 community colleges and 3 public universities have incorrect or inaccurate common cost numbering information in their most recent academic catalogs. We are working with them to bring them to make sure the institutions and the administrations are aware of these discrepancies. We believe they are not intentional, but it's just catching up with the implementation of the work. But we are, when I say we, HECC staff are in communication with these institutions to help them come into agreement about how the work shows up on their websites. The courses for alignment for 2025, you see them here. They're in biology, chemistry, communications, Spanish, and history. And as you will see in many of these cases, they are sequenced courses. So the faculty time is used efficiently, staff time at HECC is used efficiently. So I'm going to transition here to talk about the major transfer map work. And in terms of the core transfer maps, we can report that all public universities reported that the CTM, the major transfer map, articulates to at least 30 credits towards graduation. And the community colleges reported on their ability to auto-notate the core transfer maps and the Oregon transfer modules on the student transcripts. So we are seeing some challenges from the perspective of notating, and many of the institutions at the community colleges actually have to do that manually, but they are hoping and working towards having an auto-notation option for doing so. So 10 out of the 17 community colleges notate, but they do so manually. 10 out of 17 are working on a system to annotate, and we do know that 7 of them are unable to do so, mostly for capacity reasons. In terms of in terms of the accomplishments on the major transfer map side, computer science is the first approved major transfer map curriculum articulation policy on the Senate Bill 233. And I'd just like to point out that a lot of many major transfer maps work was completed on the 2998, but they needed to be crosswalked into the new administrative rule environment on the 233. So computer science was the first one to come through. Human Development and Family Services, the MTM cap, is scheduled for Transfer Council to come before the Transfer Council in January for approval. And HECC has completed institutional consultation and determination required for participation for all the MTMs in development. And this area of work just to remind the commissioners that the HECC staff, once the major transfer map areas or courses disciplines have been addressed or identified by HECC staff, we do enter into a consultation process with each of the institutions to make sure that we have it right. At any point, an institution can request to be exempt, but we begin with full participation based on the determination that the institutions that have been identified should be participating. And so it's an ongoing relationship. As these MTMs are developed, some institutions might realize that it doesn't really apply to them, and so they have an opportunity to formally request an exemption. So there are new resources, there's a new structure, and HECC staff support has increased efficiency in terms of how the work is being done. In terms of faculty engagement on the major transfer map side, we have participation from 130 faculty across 23 institutions, and we have counted up to 100 hours of subcommittee meetings. In terms of HECC staff involvement in the work, we have newly created MTM handbooks and orientation sessions to onboard new faculty and their co-chairs. Our point person for the MTM work has quarterly meetings with the co-chairs, and we also have that campus buddy system to include all non-voting institutions, so they are kept abreast of the work happening in the faculty subcommittee. We've also had significant updates to the MTM pages on the HECC website. And so all the work that's being done as new work is being approved and it goes through for implementation and dissemination, we stay abreast on our HECC website by making that information clearly available. Progress to date on the MTMs. In terms of the subcommittees, they are listed here on your left in biology, business, elementary education, English, human development and family studies, psychology, and sociology. The main task for many of these is to convert them to the new environment of the curriculum articulation policies on the Senate Bill 233. And on the left, the penultimate column, you see when these are scheduled to be completed. I'm sorry, I cannot see any hands going up, but I will just power ahead and perhaps the questions will come at the end of the presentation. For the major transfer map implementation, our surveys for the math pathway in biology, business, computer science, elementary education that has an AAOT, and English that has an Associates of Arts transfer. When we look at the number of institutions that are required to participate, you can see the column here, 15, 17, 13, 16, and 16. That would be on the, for each of those, you can see the number of institutions required to participate, but on the, to the right of that, you can see what we were able to verify as having implemented the expectations for participation. So in terms of rate of implementation, there is a lot of work to do, some areas more so than others. It's a continuous effort in improvement, and much of it has to do with communication between the transfer council, HECC staff, and the institutions, making sure they understand what the expectations are for implementation and helping them fill in any gaps that they might have in terms of understanding of what that looks like and what their responsibilities are. For the 2025 major transfer map selection, the Transfer Council named communication as the next discipline to be developed, and communication emerged as the logical choice because it provides another pathway to jobs in marketing. There are a number of MTMs that have already done substantial amounts of work, for example, in business that also targets marketing, but communication looks like a cornerstone discipline to help stage students' interest in marketing and as well the information sector. So communications was identified as one of a key discipline that could launch students in either of these directions, in marketing and information. And so we actually used information about growth, economic growth in Oregon, and where we see economic growth potential to help develop and identify these two areas. So I'm wrapping up now with policy recommendations for future opportunities. We do have a transfer council retreat coming up next week, in which we expect to have some really deep and insightful conversations, including with some of you who will be there, I believe. Chair Rowe and Vice Chair Heyman, you will be participating, the co-chairs of the Transfer Council and all the members of the Transfer Council, as well as HECC staff, to do a debrief of the work so far and figure out where there are opportunities for continuous improvement, and listening to the direction or the interest we heard today from Vice Chair Heyman and Chair Rowe, how to perhaps evolve from just the legislative, honoring legislative implementation to more a greater focus on creating these seamless pathways as the North Star of the work. We also expect to see policy recommendations to establish clear car transfer map notation and hopefully auto notation for students to make it more clear, both for students and for advisors and counselors and registrars. More work on uniform adoption and implementation of the common cost numbers and the major transfer maps. A transfer dashboard for transparency, and the work is the hope or the expectation is, as we track, or as the Transfer Council in collaboration with the HECC tracks how implementation is taking place, it will be more obvious both to students and the general public, as well as institutions, how good a job we're doing and where there is work to be done. And that transparency, we'll hope, will motivate, incentivize, and encourage all of us to do a better job in terms of honoring that North Star of making the transfer work more seamless for students. Of course, we have some areas, the Transfer Council along with HECC staff have some areas to work on, and these two are administrative rules for how we might measure success, and an appeals process for students who believe the way their credits were applied is not what they were expecting. So I apologize if I rushed through these slides. I'm hoping there are some questions. I just would like to thank you for the attention that you've been giving to the transfer work. I know it is, we all know it is very important. And at this point in time, I also want to recognize the HECC staff who put in a lot of hours producing this report. And I'm thinking of Jane Dennison-Furness, Lee Graziano, Brittany Miles, and our colleague, Charlie Hodson. And with that, I will stop sharing, and hopefully I will be able to see your faces.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Questions? Yes.
Thank you, Chair Rowe, and thank you, Veronica, for your report. Appreciate it, and all of the work that's gone into this. The common course numbering, I know that some of those meetings were quite heated at times, but the work is very important and very good for our students in the state of Oregon. I have some questions about the consequences of non-implementation, particularly with the mapping. And I heard, I think, what you may say with the dashboard to provide transparency, and that you're kind of hoping for, I don't know, public pressure on schools that are not implementing. And then a further question is, once we get all of our community colleges and public universities in line, is there any plan to put pressure on the private institutions to also adopt and accept courses and follow along, follow this plan?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm sorry, you're one of the newer commissioners, and I think your last name is Croker, so I'm apologizing if I'm missing that. I cannot see your title. I will begin with the second observation you made about compliance and the private sector. We have actually found that the private institutions who have been observers at the table are very much interested and perhaps a little bit ahead of the game in terms of their interest with common cost numbering and making sure students have seamless pathways. And I will invite my colleague, Kyle Thomas if I have